There's something in your blood that scientists can't explain. About 15% of people have it, the rest don't. And the difference matters in ways that go deeper than medicine. It's called Rh-negative blood, and it shouldn't exist. Here's what I mean. Every human blood type follows a pattern we can trace back through evolution. We share blood proteins with apes, with monkeys, with mammals that split from our family tree millions of years ago. The genetic breadcrumbs are clear. We can follow them backward through time, except for one protein, the Rh factor. Most people have it. About 85% of humans carry this protein on their red blood cells. We call them Rh positive. The protein sits there on the cell surface, does its job, causes no problems. But 15% of people don't have it at all. They're Rh negative. And here's the thing that keeps scientists up at night. We can't find where it came from. Or more accurately, we can't figure out where it went. Because the Rh factor isn't new. It's ancient. Primates have it. Mammals have it. It goes back tens of millions of years. It's in our genes. It's supposed to be there. So why did it disappear in some people? Think about this. Evolution doesn't usually delete useful things, especially things that have stuck around for millions of years. If a trait survives that long, it's doing something important. Natural selection keeps it. But the Rh factor just vanished in some human populations. No other primate lost it. Chimps have it. Gorillas have it. Orangutans have it. Every monkey species we've tested has it. Just some humans don't. And it's not random. The distribution follows patterns that don't quite make sense. In Europe, about 15% of people are Rh negative. In Africa, it's rare, maybe 3% of 5%. In Asia, even rarer. Some populations have almost none. The Basque people of northern Spain have the highest rates, up to 35% Rh negative. No one knows why. Here's what makes it stranger. Being Rh negative causes problems, real medical problems, problems that should have been eliminated by evolution. If an Rh negative woman gets pregnant with an Rh positive baby, her body attacks it. Her immune system sees the baby's blood as foreign, as dangerous. It creates antibodies. These antibodies cross the placenta. They destroy the baby's red blood cells. The first pregnancy usually goes okay, but the second one, the third, the risk climbs. Without modern medicine, many of these babies died. This is called hemolytic disease. It's serious. It's deadly. So evolution should have eliminated Rh negative blood. Women with this blood type would have had fewer surviving children. The trait should have disappeared. But it didn't. It persisted. In some populations, it even thrived. That's not how evolution is supposed to work. Scientists have been studying this since 1940. That's when Landsteiner discovered the Rh factor. He won a Nobel Prize for his work on blood types. But even he couldn't explain why some people lacked this protein. We've had 80 years to figure it out. We still don't have an answer. Let's talk about what blood actually is. Because before we can understand what's strange about Rh negative blood, we need to understand what blood does. Your blood isn't just red liquid flowing through tubes. It's a transport system, a communication network, a defense force, all at once. Think of it as a river carrying cargo ships. The river is plasma, that's the liquid part. Mostly water, mixed with proteins and nutrients. The cargo ships are cells, 3 types. Red blood cells carry oxygen. They're tiny discs, billions of them. They pick up oxygen in your lungs, drop it off at your tissues, then head back for more. They're shaped like donuts without the hole. That shape maximizes surface area. More surface means more oxygen. White blood cells fight infections. They're your immune system's army. They patrol. They attack invaders. They remember enemies. Some live for days, others live for years, waiting for the right threat. Platelets seal wounds. They're cell fragments. When you cut yourself, they rush to the site. They stick together, form a plug, stop the bleeding. Without them, you'd bleed out from a paper cut. But here's what matters for our story. The surface of these cells. Cell surfaces aren't smooth. They're covered in proteins. Think of them like name tags or ID badges. These proteins tell your immune system what's you and what's not. Your immune system is paranoid. It has to be. Bacteria, viruses, parasites, they're all trying to get in. So your immune system checks everything. It looks at the proteins on every cell surface. If the proteins match your body's pattern, the immune system leaves it alone. If they don't match, the immune system attacks. This is why organ transplants are so tricky. The new organ has different surface proteins. Your immune system sees it as foreign. It tries to destroy it. Doctors have to suppress your immune system to make transplants work. Blood types are about these surface proteins. Landsteiner figured this out in 1901. He was mixing blood samples, seeing what happened. Sometimes the blood mixed fine, sometimes it clumped. The red blood cells stuck together, formed clusters. This was bad. This would kill you if it happened in your body. He realized there were patterns. Some blood mixed with some types, but not others. He identified 3 types at first. He called them A, B, and C. Later, C got renamed to O. Then his colleagues found a 4th type, AB. Here's how it works. Type A blood has A proteins on the red blood cell surface. Type B has B proteins. Type AB has both. Type O has neither. But that's only half the story. Your blood also has antibodies. These are proteins floating in your plasma. They're part of your immune system. They attack foreign proteins. If you have type A blood, you have anti-B antibodies. If you have type B blood, you have anti-A antibodies. If you have type O blood, you have both anti-A and anti-B antibodies. If you have type AB blood, you have neither. This matters for transfusions. Give type A blood to someone with type B blood and their anti-A antibodies attack. The donated red blood cells clump. They block blood vessels. Organs fail. The person dies. This happened a lot before Landsteiner figured it out. Doctors tried blood transfusions. Sometimes the patient lived, sometimes they died. Nobody knew why. It seemed random. It wasn't random. It was blood types. Once Landsteiner published his findings, transfusion medicine became safe. Doctors could match blood types, save lives. Landsteiner won the Nobel Prize in 1930. But he wasn't done. In 1937, he started looking at rhesus monkeys. He was studying their blood, seeing if monkey blood proteins could tell him anything about human blood. He found a protein on rhesus monkey red blood cells, a protein that most humans also had, about 85% of people. He called it the rhesus factor, Rh for short. If you had the protein, you were Rh positive. If you didn't, you were Rh negative. At first, this seemed like just another blood type category. Interesting, but not earth-shattering. Just one more protein to check before transfusions. But then doctors noticed something. Pregnant women with Rh-negative blood were having problems. Their babies were being born sick, yellow skin, swollen. Some died within hours. Others needed immediate blood transfusions to survive. It took a few years to figure out what was happening. The problem occurred when an Rh-negative mother carried an Rh-positive baby. The baby inherited the Rh-positive gene from the father. So the baby's red blood cells had the Rh protein, the mother's didn't. During pregnancy, some of the baby's blood crosses into the mother's bloodstream. Not much, just a little. Especially during delivery. The mother's immune system sees this foreign protein, the Rh protein she doesn't have. It treats it like an infection. It creates antibodies, anti-Rh antibodies. The first pregnancy usually goes fine. The antibodies don't develop fast enough to harm the first baby. But now the mother's immune system remembers. It's primed, ready. If she gets pregnant again with another Rh-positive baby, those antibodies are waiting. They cross the placenta. They enter the baby's bloodstream. They attack the baby's red blood cells, destroy them. This is hemolytic disease of the newborn. Hemolytic means destroying blood cells. The baby's red blood cells break apart. Release their contents. The baby becomes anemic. Not enough red blood cells to carry oxygen. The liver and spleen work overtime trying to make new ones. They swell. Fluid builds up in the baby's tissues. The breakdown products from destroyed red blood cells include bilirubin. That's what makes the baby's skin yellow. Too much bilirubin damages the brain, causes seizures, developmental problems, death. Before modern medicine, this killed thousands of babies every year. Second pregnancies were dangerous. Third pregnancies were worse. Each pregnancy increased the mother's antibody levels. Rh-negative women had fewer surviving children than Rh-positive women. The evolutionary pressure was real and strong. So why didn't Rh-negative blood disappear? That's the question scientists have been asking for 80 years. Evolution should have eliminated this trait. Women with Rh-negative blood faced a reproductive disadvantage, a serious one. Natural selection should have favored Rh-positive blood, but it didn't. Rh-negative blood persisted. In some populations, it became common. Really common. The Basque people have rates up to 35%. 1 in 3 Basque people are Rh negative. That's not a trait being eliminated. That's a trait being maintained, maybe even selected for. Why? There must be an advantage, something that balances out the pregnancy problems, something that makes Rh negative blood worth keeping. But we can't figure out what it is. Some scientists think Rh negative blood offers resistance to certain diseases. Maybe parasites. Maybe infections that were common in ancient Europe but rare now. The advantage would have been invisible once modern medicine eliminated those diseases. Others think it's genetic drift, random chance, small populations in isolated areas. The trait got common by accident, not because it helped, just because the people who had it survived for other reasons. Still others think there's something about the Rh protein itself we don't understand. Maybe having it is costly somehow. Maybe making that protein takes resources, energy. Maybe in certain environments, not making it saves enough energy to matter. None of these explanations quite fit the data. The disease resistance theory is appealing, but we can't find the disease. We've tested Rh negative blood against dozens of pathogens. No consistent pattern emerges. The genetic drift theory works for small isolated populations, but Rh negative blood is too common. Too widespread. Drift alone can't explain 15% of Europeans carrying this trait. The metabolic cost theory is interesting, but the Rh protein is tiny, making it costs almost nothing, not enough to create evolutionary pressure. We're missing something. Something about Rh negative blood matters. Mattered enough to keep it in the gene pool despite the pregnancy problems. Mattered enough to make it common in some populations. We just don't know what. And here's what makes it even stranger. The Rh system isn't simple. It's not just positive or negative. That's the simplified version we use in medicine. The full Rh system has dozens of proteins, related proteins, variations. The main one is called RhD. That's what we test for. That's what causes the pregnancy problems. But there are others, RhC, RhE, RhC, RhE, each with its own variations, its own patterns of inheritance. Most people have the full set, all the Rh proteins, but some people are missing one or two or several. The patterns don't make sense evolutionarily. These proteins are related. They probably evolved from a single ancestor protein, then duplicated, diverged, specialized. But in some people, parts of the system are just gone, deleted from the genome, not mutated into something else, just absent. Evolution doesn't usually work like that. Deleting functional genes is risky, usually fatal, but somehow deleting parts of the Rh system isn't fatal. People live normal lives. They just can't receive certain blood transfusions, and Rh negative women have pregnancy complications. That's it. For such an ancient system, it's surprisingly optional. And that's what keeps scientists puzzled. Blood proteins this old are usually essential. You can't live without them. But the Rh system? Apparently you can. 15% of people prove it every day. If you're using this to fall asleep, that's exactly why I make these videos. Maybe subscribe and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. I always check the comments, and it's fascinating. There's something perfect about falling asleep to unsolved questions. Your conscious mind lets go, stops trying to figure it out. And maybe that's the point. Not every mystery needs solving tonight. Some questions are better as companions than answers. The Rh negative story continues. And you're welcome to drift wherever these words take you. Now, back to our story. Here's the thing about pregnancy and Rh negative blood. It's dangerous. Not in an obvious way, not in a way anyone could have predicted. The danger shows up in the second pregnancy, sometimes the third. The mother's body turns against her own child, and for thousands of years nobody understood why. A woman gives birth to her first baby. Everything goes fine. The baby is healthy. The mother recovers. Life continues. Then she gets pregnant again. And this time something goes wrong. The second baby is born weak, jaundiced, yellow skin, struggling to breathe. Sometimes the baby dies within hours. Sometimes it survives but suffers brain damage from the lack of oxygen. The mother is healthy, the father is healthy, but the baby is dying. It happened over and over, throughout history, in every population. Nobody knew why second babies were more likely to die. Nobody knew why some mothers seemed cursed, why their first child would thrive and their later children would suffer. The pattern was there. Doctors noticed it, but they couldn't explain it. In the 1600s, a French midwife named Louise Bourgeois documented cases of babies born with what she called yellow disease. The skin turned golden, the eyes turned amber. The babies often died within days. She noticed it happened more often in second or third pregnancies. But she had no explanation. In the 1800s, doctors had a name for it: hemolytic disease of the newborn. The baby's red blood cells were being destroyed, hemolyzed, broken apart. But nobody knew why. Nobody knew what was attacking the blood. The babies would be born severely anemic. Not enough red blood cells, not enough oxygen reaching the brain. The liver would swell trying to produce more blood cells. The spleen would enlarge. Bilirubin would build up in the blood, turning the skin yellow. Kernicterus would set in. Brain damage from the toxic buildup. Doctors tried everything. Blood transfusions sometimes helped, but often the transfusions made things worse. The baby would get sicker. The mystery deepened. Then in 1939, two doctors made a connection. Philip Levine and Rufus Stetson were studying a case in New York. A woman had given birth to a stillborn baby. She needed a blood transfusion. Her husband offered to donate. Same blood type, AB, O matched perfectly. Should have worked fine. But when they mixed her blood with her husband's blood in the lab, something strange happened. Her blood attacked his, clumped it, destroyed it. Even though they were the same ABO type, there was something else in the blood. Something they hadn't discovered yet. Something beyond A, B, and O. Levine and Stetson realized the mother must have developed antibodies against something in her husband's blood. And since the baby gets half its blood type from the father, the mother's antibodies were attacking the baby's blood. That's why the baby died. That's why the mother's blood rejected her husband's blood. She'd been sensitized during pregnancy, but they didn't know what the antibodies were attacking. What was the target? That same year, Carl Landsteiner was working on his rhesus monkey experiments. He discovered the Rh factor, a protein on red blood cells, present in 85% of humans, absent in 15%. The connection clicked into place. An Rh-negative mother carrying an Rh-positive baby. The baby inherits the Rh factor from its father. During pregnancy, especially during birth, some of the baby's blood crosses into the mother's bloodstream, just a few drops, but it's enough. The mother's immune system sees the Rh protein as foreign, as an invader. It creates antibodies against it. Anti-D antibodies. They circulate in her blood, waiting. The first pregnancy usually goes fine. The antibodies develop late, after birth. The first baby is born before the immune response fully kicks in. But those antibodies stay in the mother's blood. For years, for life, waiting. When she gets pregnant again with another Rh-positive baby, the antibodies are already there, ready. They cross the placenta, they enter the baby's bloodstream, they attach to the baby's red blood cells, they mark them for destruction. The baby's immune system destroys its own blood cells. Anemia sets in. The baby struggles. The heart works harder, trying to pump enough oxygen. Fluid builds up in the tissues. The liver swells. The baby might die in the womb or be born critically ill. This is hemolytic disease of the newborn. This is what was killing second babies throughout history. This is the danger of Rh-negative blood. Think about the numbers. 15% of people are Rh-negative. Most of them are women. About half of those women will marry Rh-positive men. That means roughly 7% of all pregnancies involve an Rh-negative mother and Rh-positive father. And in those pregnancies, if the baby is Rh-positive, the risk is there. The first baby sensitizes the mother, the second baby suffers. Without medical intervention, about 10% of second babies die. Another 20% suffer brain damage or other complications. For thousands of years this happened. Nobody knew why. Nobody could prevent it. Families would lose child after child, the first baby healthy, then a string of losses, yellow babies, weak babies, dead babies. Some cultures developed superstitions. The second child is cursed, the mother has bad blood, evil spirits attack the pregnancy. None of it was true, but it was all they had to explain the pattern. In some populations, the impact was severe. The Basque people, with their high percentage of Rh-negative blood, would have seen this more often. An Rh-negative mother was more likely. An Rh-positive father was almost guaranteed. The combination was common. The losses would have been frequent. Maybe that's part of why Rh-negative populations stayed small. Not just genetic drift, not just isolation, but actual reproductive disadvantage. Rh-negative mothers losing babies, families having fewer surviving children. The gene frequency staying low because the trait carried a hidden cost. But here's what's strange. The danger only exists in mixed couples. An Rh-negative mother with an Rh-positive father. If both parents are Rh-negative, there's no problem. The baby is Rh-negative, no foreign protein, no immune response, no danger. And if the mother is Rh-positive, there's no problem either. She already has the Rh protein, her immune system recognizes it. No antibodies form, the baby is safe. The danger exists only at the boundary, where Rh-negative meets Rh-positive, where the populations mix, where the genetics collide. It's almost like a biological barrier, a reproductive incompatibility. Not complete, not absolute, but significant enough to matter, significant enough to affect survival rates, significant enough to keep the populations somewhat separate. Some researchers have suggested this is evidence of separate origins. That Rh-negative and Rh-positive humans are fundamentally different, that we're not fully compatible, that we're separate subspecies or even separate species. That's probably going too far. We're clearly the same species. We can reproduce. The first baby proves that. But there's something there, some incompatibility, some biological friction at the genetic level. And it raises questions. Why would evolution allow this? Why would a trait persist that makes pregnancy dangerous? Why wouldn't natural selection eliminate Rh-negative blood if it causes mothers to lose babies? Unless the trait has advantages that outweigh the cost. Unless being Rh-negative provides some benefit we haven't discovered yet. Unless there's a reason the gene survived despite the reproductive disadvantage. Or unless Rh-negative blood is relatively new. Too recent for evolution to have fully dealt with the incompatibility. If the mutation appeared only 25,000 or 35,000 years ago, that's not much time in evolutionary terms. Maybe the populations haven't fully adapted yet. Maybe the incompatibility is a temporary problem that evolution is still working out. But we don't know. We're speculating. What we do know is that for most of human history, Rh incompatibility killed babies. Lots of babies. And nobody knew why. Until 1939. Until Levine and Stetson made the connection. Until Landsteiner discovered the Rh factor. Until doctors finally understood what was happening in the blood. And then, remarkably, they found a solution. A way to prevent the tragedy. A way to save the babies. But that solution raises its own questions, its own mysteries, its own strange implications about what Rh-negative blood really is. The solution came from an unexpected place. A prison in Sing Sing, New York, 1960. A group of inmates volunteering for medical research. Dr. John Gorman was studying antibodies. He needed blood samples, lots of them. The prisoners agreed to help. They donated blood, they participated in experiments, they became part of something bigger than themselves. Gorman was working with two other doctors, Vincent Freda and William Pollack. They were all focused on the same problem. How to prevent Rh disease. How to stop mothers from making antibodies against their babies. The logic was simple. The mother makes antibodies because she's exposed to Rh-positive blood. Her baby's blood, during pregnancy, during birth. A few drops cross into her bloodstream, her immune system reacts, antibodies form. The next baby suffers. But what if you could stop the antibodies from forming? What if you could trick the immune system? Here's what they figured out. When foreign blood enters your body, your immune system has to recognize it first, has to identify it as foreign. That takes time. Hours, sometimes days. The immune system studies the invader, analyzes it, then creates specific antibodies to attack it. But what if the foreign blood was destroyed immediately? Before the immune system could study it, before it could create antibodies? That's the trick. That's the solution. Give the mother antibodies right after birth, anti-D antibodies, the same antibodies her body would make naturally, but give them to her immediately, within 72 hours of delivery. Those antibodies attack any Rh-positive blood cells in her system. The baby's blood cells that cross during birth, they destroy them fast, before her immune system notices, before her body can mount its own response. It's like cleaning up evidence before the detective arrives. The foreign blood is gone. The immune system never sees it, never studies it, never learns to attack it. No antibodies form. The next pregnancy is safe. The idea was brilliant. But they had to test it. They had to prove it worked. That's where the Sing Sing prisoners came in. Gorman needed Rh-negative volunteers, men who could receive injections of Rh-positive blood, men whose immune systems would react, men who could be monitored carefully. The prisoners agreed. They understood the risks. They wanted to help. Gorman injected them with small amounts of Rh-positive blood, watched their immune systems respond, watched antibodies form. Then he tried the treatment, gave them anti-D antibodies right after the Rh-positive blood, watched what happened. It worked. The anti-D antibodies destroyed the foreign blood cells immediately. The prisoners' immune systems never mounted a full response, never created their own antibodies. The treatment prevented sensitization. By 1968, the treatment was ready. They called it RhoGAM, Rh immune globulin, a shot given to Rh-negative mothers after delivery, after miscarriage, after any event where the baby's blood might mix with the mother's. The shot contains anti-D antibodies, harvested from donors, purified, concentrated, one injection, given within 72 hours. It prevents the mother from making her own antibodies, protects future pregnancies. The impact was immediate, dramatic. Before RhoGAM, about 10,000 babies died each year in the United States from Rh disease. Thousands more suffered brain damage. Within a decade of introducing RhoGAM, those numbers dropped by 90%. Today, Rh disease is rare, almost unheard of in developed countries. Every Rh-negative mother gets tested. Every pregnancy is monitored. RhoGAM is given routinely. The babies survive. It's one of the great success stories of modern medicine. A simple solution to an ancient problem. A shot that saves thousands of lives every year. But here's what's interesting. The solution only works because we can harvest antibodies from other people. From Rh-negative mothers who were already sensitized, women who lost babies to Rh disease, women whose immune systems created anti-D antibodies naturally. These women became donors. Their blood contains the antibodies needed to protect other mothers. Their loss became someone else's salvation. There's something profound in that, something circular. The disease creates the cure. The mothers who suffered provide the protection for mothers who come after. For years, that's how RhoGAM was made, from human donors. Women who'd been sensitized, their plasma was collected, the antibodies extracted, purified, turned into medicine. But there was always a supply problem. Not enough donors, not enough antibodies. As RhoGAM became more widely used, demand increased. More mothers needed protection. The supply couldn't keep up. Scientists started looking for alternatives. Ways to produce anti-D antibodies without relying on human donors. They tried creating them in labs, engineering them, growing them in cell cultures. It took decades. But eventually, they succeeded. Today, most RhoGAM is produced synthetically. Monoclonal antibodies, created in controlled environments, no donors needed, unlimited supply. The treatment evolved, improved. Now mothers get RhoGAM during pregnancy too, around 28 weeks. Just in case, just to be safe. Anytime there might be mixing of blood, after amniocentesis, after trauma, after bleeding. The protocol is thorough, careful, it catches almost every case. Rh disease is now preventable completely, as long as the mother gets the shots, as long as the system works. But the solution raises questions. Big questions about what Rh-negative blood really is, about why this incompatibility exists at all. Think about it. We needed modern medicine to solve this problem. Before 1968, Rh-negative mothers lost babies. For thousands of years, throughout history, the trait caused suffering, caused death, reduced reproductive success. So why did it persist? Why didn't evolution eliminate it? Natural selection should have worked against Rh-negative blood. Mothers who were Rh-negative had fewer surviving children. Families carrying the trait would have been at a disadvantage. The gene frequency should have dropped, eventually disappeared. But it didn't. The trait survived, stayed at roughly 15% in European populations, higher in some groups, lower in others, but always present, always there. That suggests something. Either the trait is very new, too recent for evolution to have eliminated it, or it provides some advantage, some benefit that outweighs the cost of losing babies. The timing matters. If Rh-negative blood appeared 25,000 years ago, that's only about 1,000 generations. Not much time in evolutionary terms. Maybe natural selection hasn't had time to work yet. Maybe the trait is still being tested, still being evaluated by the slow machinery of evolution. Or maybe the advantage is hidden. Maybe Rh-negative blood provides protection against something, the disease, a parasite. Something that killed enough Rh-positive people to balance out the baby's loss to Rh disease. Some researchers have suggested Rh-negative people are more resistant to certain infections. Toxoplasmosis, a parasite carried by cats, it infects about a third of humans worldwide. Usually harmless, but it can cause serious problems in pregnancy. Birth defects, miscarriage. Studies show Rh-negative people might be less susceptible, might be partially protected. If that's true, it could explain the persistence of the trait. Fewer babies lost to infection, enough to balance the baby's loss to Rh disease. But the evidence is mixed, controversial. Not everyone agrees. The protection might be real, or it might be statistical noise. We don't know for sure. Other researchers point to different advantages. Rh-negative people might have stronger immune responses in general, might be better at fighting off certain diseases, might have some subtle edge in survival that we haven't identified yet. Or maybe there's no advantage at all. Maybe the trait persists because of genetic drift. Random chance. Small populations, isolation, the Basque people, the Berbers, groups where Rh-negative blood became common not because it helped, but because it happened to be there, because the founders carried it, because isolation preserved it. That's possible too. Evolution isn't always about advantage. Sometimes traits persist just because they're not harmful enough to eliminate, because they're linked to other genes, because populations are small and random chance matters. But here's what bothers some researchers. The incompatibility is so specific, so targeted. Rh-negative mothers with Rh-positive babies. The mother's immune system attacks. The baby suffers. It's almost designed, almost intentional, like a biological barrier. A reproductive incompatibility meant to keep populations separate, to prevent mixing, to maintain genetic boundaries. That sounds like science fiction, like conspiracy theory. But the pattern is there. The incompatibility exists, and it's not trivial. Before Rogam, it killed babies. Lots of them. Enough to matter, enough to affect population genetics. Some fringe researchers have taken this further, suggested that Rh-negative and Rh-positive humans are fundamentally different origins, different species. The incompatibility is evidence of separate evolution, separate lineages. They point to other differences. Claim that Rh-negative people have lower body temperature, different blood pressure, different reactions to pregnancy, different susceptibility to certain diseases. Most of this is nonsense. Confirmation bias, cherry-picked data. The differences are minor, statistically insignificant. Rh-negative and Rh-positive people are clearly the same species. We interbreed successfully. The first baby proves that. But the incompatibility is real. The immune response is real. The danger is real. And that's strange. That's worth thinking about. Why would human populations develop a reproductive barrier? Why would mothers' bodies attack their own babies? It doesn't make sense from an evolutionary perspective. Unless something else is going on. Unless there's a piece of the puzzle we're missing. The solution. Rogam. The shot that saves babies. It works. It's effective. It's routine. But it's also a workaround. A medical intervention that bypasses a natural incompatibility. We're using technology to override biology, to make something work that nature seems to resist. That's not necessarily bad. Medicine does this all the time. We fix genetic problems, treat diseases, extend lives, help people reproduce who otherwise couldn't. That's what medicine is for. But it means we're changing the evolutionary landscape. Before Rogam, Rh-negative mothers had fewer surviving children. The trait was selected against, slowly, gently, but consistently. Now that selection pressure is gone. Rh-negative mothers have just as many children as anyone else. The trait might become more common. The gene frequency might shift. We've removed a natural barrier, changed the rules, made something possible that wasn't before. And we don't know what the long-term consequences are. Maybe none. Maybe it doesn't matter. Or maybe we're preserving a trait that nature was trying to eliminate. Maybe we're changing human genetics in ways we don't fully understand. These are big questions. Philosophical questions. Not just medical ones. They touch on what it means to be human, what it means to intervene in evolution, what it means to decide which traits survive and which don't. The prisoners at Sing Sing helped solve a medical crisis, saved thousands of lives, made pregnancies safer for millions of women. That's unambiguously good. But they also helped preserve a genetic mystery, kept alive a trait that might have disappeared. extended a puzzle that evolution might have been trying to solve on its own. We solved the immediate problem, stopped the babies from dying, but we still don't understand the bigger picture. Why Rh-negative blood exists, where it came from, what it means, why human populations carry this strange incompatibility in their genes. The solution works. The babies live, but the mystery remains. Here's the thing about Rh-negative blood. It shouldn't exist at all. Not because it's harmful, not because it doesn't work, but because of what it costs. The babies lost, the pregnancies that failed, the mothers who watched their second child die, their third, their fourth. For thousands of years this happened. Before we understood blood types, before we had ROGAM, before we could prevent it, Rh-negative mothers lost babies. Consistently. Predictably. Every pregnancy after the first was a risk. That's a massive evolutionary disadvantage. Huge. In the calculus of natural selection, reproductive success is everything. Genes that help you have more surviving children spread through populations. Genes that cause you to lose children disappear. Rh-negative blood causes mothers to lose children. So it should have disappeared. Millions of years ago. Long before modern humans even existed. The trait should have been eliminated, weeded out, gone. But it's not gone, it's common. 15% of Europeans carry it. 27% of Basque people. Significant numbers in North Africa, the Middle East, Central Asia. The trait survived, persisted, stayed in the gene pool despite the cost. And that's strange, that demands explanation. Evolution is ruthless, efficient. It doesn't preserve traits that reduce reproductive success. Not for long. Not without a reason. If Rh-negative blood is still here, something else must be going on. Something that balances the equation. Something that makes the trait worth keeping despite the dead babies. So what could that be? Let's start with the simplest explanation. Maybe the trait is just really new, too recent for evolution to have eliminated it yet. Evolution works slowly, generationally. A harmful trait doesn't disappear overnight. It takes time, hundreds of generations, thousands. The more harmful the trait, the faster it disappears. But even deadly traits can persist for a while if they appeared recently enough. How recent is recent? For humans, a generation is about 25 years. That means 1,000 generations equals 25,000 years. That sounds like a long time, but in evolutionary terms, it's nothing. A blink. Barely enough time for natural selection to work. If Rh-negative blood appeared 25,000 years ago, we might still be watching it disappear. The process might be ongoing, slow, gradual, the gene frequency dropping generation by generation, but still present, still detectable. Some geneticists think this is exactly what's happening. They've studied the Rh gene, traced its mutations, built family trees of genetic variants, and what they found suggests the Rh-negative mutation is relatively young, maybe 30,000 to 40,000 years old, maybe less. That timeline fits. It's recent enough that the trait hasn't been eliminated yet, but old enough that it's spread through multiple populations, found its way across continents, reached significant frequencies in some groups. But here's the problem with that explanation. The trait isn't just hanging on, it's not rare. It's not dying out slowly. In some populations, it's actually common, really common. The Basque people, 27% Rh-negative. That's not a trait on its way out. That's not a harmful mutation being eliminated. That's a trait that's been maintained, preserved, maybe even selected for. And that changes everything. Because if the trait is being maintained, there must be a reason, an advantage, something that makes Rh-negative blood worth keeping despite the cost. So what could that advantage be? One possibility is disease resistance. Maybe Rh-negative people are better at fighting off certain infections, better at surviving certain illnesses. And that advantage outweighs the disadvantage of losing babies to Rh disease. This isn't crazy. Blood type affects disease susceptibility. We know this. Type O blood protects against severe malaria. Type A increases risk of stomach cancer. Type B affects cholera survival rates. Blood type matters for disease resistance. So maybe Rh-negative blood protects against something deadly. Something that killed enough Rh-positive people to balance out the babies lost to Rh incompatibility. Researchers have looked for this, studied Rh-negative people, compared their health outcomes to Rh-positive people, looked for patterns, differences, advantages, and they found some. Small ones, Subtle ones, nothing definitive, but suggestive. Rh-negative people seem to have different immune responses. More reactive in some ways, less in others. They produce different levels of certain antibodies, respond differently to vaccines, fight infections differently. One study found Rh-negative people are less likely to get toxoplasmosis, a parasitic infection, carried by cats, spread through undercooked meat, contaminated water, soil. Toxoplasmosis is common. About a third of humans worldwide have been infected. Usually it's harmless, your immune system fights it off, you might not even notice. But in pregnancy, it's dangerous. Can cause miscarriage, birth defects, brain damage in the baby. If Rh-negative people are protected against toxoplasmosis, that's huge. That could explain everything. Fewer infections mean healthier pregnancies, more surviving children, enough to offset the losses from Rh disease. But the evidence is mixed. Some studies show protection. Others don't. The effect might be real, or it might be statistical noise. Sample size problems, confounding variables, we don't know for sure. Other researchers point to different diseases. Maybe Rh-negative blood protects against certain viruses, certain bacterial infections. Maybe it affects how your immune system handles parasites in general. Or maybe the advantage isn't about disease at all. Maybe it's something else, something more subtle. Something we haven't thought to look for yet. Here's another possibility. Maybe Rh-negative blood doesn't provide an advantage on its own. Maybe it's linked to other genes that do provide advantages, and the whole package gets preserved together. This happens in evolution. Genetic linkage. Genes that sit close together on chromosomes get inherited together. If one gene is beneficial, the genes near it get carried along, even if they're neutral, even if they're slightly harmful. Maybe Rh-negative blood is just along for the ride, sitting next to genes that matter more. Genes that affect intelligence, or immune function, or metabolism, or something else important. The Rh gene gets preserved because its neighbors are valuable. That would explain the persistence. And it would explain why we can't find an obvious advantage to being Rh-negative, because there isn't one. The advantage is somewhere else, in genes we haven't identified yet. But this raises another question. If Rh-negative blood is neutral or slightly harmful, why is it so common in some populations? Why the Basque people? Why the Berbers? Why pockets of high frequency scattered across Europe and North Africa? That pattern suggests something else. Founder effects, genetic drift, small populations, isolation. Here's how that works. Imagine a small group splits off from a larger population, maybe 100 people, maybe 200. They migrate, find a new territory, start a new community. They're isolated, cut off from other groups. They intermarry, have children, build a population. By chance, maybe 30% of those founders carried the Rh-negative gene. That's higher than average, but not impossible, just random variation. Now those founders' genes spread through the new population. Everyone descends from them. The high frequency of Rh-negative blood gets locked in, preserved, not because it's beneficial, just because it was there at the start. Over time, if the population stays isolated, that frequency persists. Genetic drift, random chance, small population size. The usual mechanisms that eliminate harmful traits work slowly, maybe not at all if the population is small enough. This could explain the Basque people. They're isolated, linguistically unique, genetically distinct. They've been in the same region for thousands of years. Limited mixing with other populations. High frequency of Rh-negative blood, not because it helps, just because their ancestors happened to carry it. The Berbers might be similar. Isolated mountain populations, limited gene flow, founder effects, random chance preserved as genetic quirk. But that doesn't explain everywhere else. Rh-negative blood is found across Europe, 15% average. That's too widespread to be just founder effects, too consistent across different populations, too evenly distributed. If it was just genetic drift, you'd expect more variation. Some populations with very high frequencies, others with almost none. Random patches, uneven distribution. But that's not what we see. The frequency is relatively stable across large regions. That suggests something else is maintaining it. Some kind of balance, some reason the trait stays at around 15% instead of drifting higher or lower. One possibility is balanced polymorphism. That's when a trait is maintained because heterozygotes have an advantage. People who carry one copy of the gene but not two. They get the benefits without the costs. The classic example is sickle cell anemia. Having 2 copies of the sickle cell gene causes severe disease, but having 1 copy protects against malaria. In regions with malaria, the trait persists because carriers are protected. The advantage to carriers balances out the cost to people with 2 copies. Could something similar be happening with Rh blood? Maybe people who carry 1 Rh negative gene and 1 Rh positive gene have some advantage. Maybe they're healthier, more resistant to disease, better at something. But that doesn't quite work, because Rh blood type isn't like sickle cell. You either have the Rh protein or you don't. There's no carrier state, no heterozygote advantage. You're Rh positive or Rh negative, nothing in between. Unless we're missing something. Unless there are other genes involved. Other factors. Complications we haven't discovered yet. The genetics of Rh blood is actually more complex than we usually acknowledge. The Rh system isn't just one gene. It's a family of genes, multiple variants, different combinations. The simple positive-negative distinction is a simplification. Useful clinically, but genetically incomplete. Maybe some of those variants provide advantages. Maybe certain combinations are beneficial. Maybe the full picture is more complicated than we realize. Or maybe we're thinking about this wrong. Maybe the question isn't why Rh negative blood persists. Maybe the question is why Rh positive blood became dominant. Think about it differently. What if Rh negative is the original state, the ancestral condition, and Rh positive is the mutation, the new variant, the thing that appeared and spread? If that's true, then Rh negative blood doesn't need an explanation. It's just what was there first, the baseline, the default. Rh positive blood is what needs explaining. Why did it spread? What advantage did it provide? Some geneticists think this is exactly what happened. They've studied primate blood, compared humans to chimpanzees, gorillas, other apes, and what they found is interesting. Most primates are Rh positive. They have the Rh protein. It's common, widespread, ancient. The gene goes back millions of years, long before humans evolved. But in humans, a significant minority lacks it. 15% of Europeans, lower frequencies in other populations, but still present, still there. That suggests the Rh negative variant appeared in humans relatively recently. After we split from other primates, after we became a separate species, it's a human-specific mutation, or at least much more common in humans than in our relatives. So maybe Rh positive is the ancestral state, and Rh negative is the innovation, the new variant. And the question is why it spread at all. Why it reached 15% in some populations. What advantage it provided that allowed it to increase from 0 to significant frequencies. But we're back to the same problem. What advantage? We can't find one, or at least not one that's obvious. Not one that's strong enough to explain the spread, unless the advantage was temporary. Something that mattered in the past, but doesn't matter now. A disease that's extinct. An environmental condition that no longer exists. A selective pressure that disappeared. This happens in evolution. Traits are selected for specific reasons, specific environments. Then the environment changes. The selective pressure disappears, but the trait remains. A fossil. An echo of past conditions. Maybe Rh negative blood was advantageous 20,000 years ago, protected against some ice age disease, some parasite that's now extinct. Some condition that no longer exists, the trait spread, reached significant frequencies. Then the advantage disappeared, but the trait remained, maintained by genetic inertia, not harmful enough to eliminate, not beneficial anymore, just there. That's possible, plausible even, but frustrating, because it means we might never know. The evidence is gone, the disease extinct, the selective pressure vanished into the past. All we have left is the trait itself, the genetic signature. The mystery. Some researchers have suggested the advantage might be psychological. Neurological. Maybe Rh negative people think differently, process information differently, have different cognitive strengths. There's some evidence for this. Weak evidence, controversial, but suggestive. Studies have found small differences in personality traits, cognitive styles, stress responses. Rh negative people score slightly differently on certain tests, show different patterns in brain imaging, respond differently to certain situations. But the differences are small, inconsistent, hard to replicate. Could be real, could be noise. The research is preliminary, inconclusive, more work is needed. And even if the differences are real, it's not clear their advantages. Different doesn't mean better, just different. A cognitive style that's beneficial in one context might be harmful in another. What helps in one environment might hurt in another. So we're left with uncertainty, multiple possibilities, no clear answer. Rh-negative blood persists. We don't know why. We have theories, hypotheses, educated guesses, but no proof, no definitive explanation. And that's unsettling, because it means there's something fundamental about human genetics we don't understand. A trait affecting millions of people, present in every population, causing medical complications, and we don't know where it came from, why it's here, what it means. The evolutionary puzzle remains unsolved. The trait persists. The babies live now because of Rogam. But the mystery deepens. Why would evolution create a trait that kills babies? Why would it maintain a reproductive incompatibility? Why would nature build a barrier between mothers and children? These are the questions that keep geneticists up at night. The puzzles that resist easy answers. The mysteries that suggest our understanding of human evolution is incomplete. That there are pieces missing, patterns we haven't recognized, forces we haven't identified. Rh-negative blood exists, that's a fact. But why it exists remains one of the great unsolved questions of human genetics. The pattern is strange when you look at a map. Rh-negative blood clusters. It concentrates in specific places, specific populations, and the distribution doesn't make obvious sense. It doesn't follow climate zones, doesn't track with latitude, doesn't correlate with any environmental factor we can identify. The highest frequencies are in Europe, especially Western Europe, 15% average across the continent, but it's not evenly spread. Some populations have much more, others much less. The Basque people top the chart, 27% Rh-negative, that's almost 1 in 3. Incredibly high. Far above any other population on Earth. The Basques live in the Pyrenees Mountains, the border region between France and Spain. They've been there for thousands of years, maybe longer. Their language is unique, not related to any other European language, not related to any language anywhere. It stands alone, isolated, ancient. Geneticists call the Basque people a genetic island. They're distinct, separate. They carry genetic markers that set them apart from surrounding populations. Limited mixing with outsiders, limited gene flow. They've maintained their genetic identity for millennia, and they have the highest frequency of Rh-negative blood in the world. That's not random. Can't be. The concentration is too extreme, too specific. Something about the Basque people preserved this trait. Something about their history, their isolation, their genetics. Move east from the Basque country, and the frequency drops, but not evenly, not gradually. There are pockets, clusters, areas of higher concentration. Ireland has high rates, 16 to 17%. Scotland similar. Wales even higher in some regions. The Celtic populations of Western Europe. They carry more Rh-negative blood than their neighbors. The Berbers of North Africa also show elevated frequencies, especially in mountain regions. The Atlas Mountains, isolated valleys, places where populations stayed separate, where mixing was limited. Central Asia has pockets too. Certain tribes, certain ethnic groups, not widespread, but present, noticeable, higher than surrounding populations. The pattern suggests something, multiple somethings. Isolation matters, mountain populations, island populations, groups that stayed separate, that didn't mix extensively with neighbors. They preserved higher frequencies. But why? Why would isolation preserve Rh-negative blood specifically? Why not other traits? Why this one? One answer is founder effects. We talked about this before. Small founding populations, random genetic variation. If the founders happen to carry high frequencies of Rh-negative blood, that frequency gets locked in, preserved through isolation. The Basques fit this pattern perfectly. Small population, isolated region, limited mixing for thousands of years. If their founding population had high Rh-negative frequency, it would stay high. Genetic drift would maintain it. Random chance preserved as genetic signature. But that raises another question. Where did those founders come from? Who were they? And why did they have such high Rh-negative frequency in the first place? Some researchers think the answer goes back to the Ice Age, the last glacial maximum, 20,000 years ago. Ice sheets covered northern Europe. Glaciers reached down to Germany. Britain was buried. Scandinavia uninhabitable. Humans retreated south. Found refuge in warmer regions. Spain, Italy, the Balkans, small populations, isolated pockets. Refugia. Places where people survived while ice covered the north. The Basque region was one of these refugia. Protected by mountains, warmer than the frozen north, habitable. People lived there, survived there, waited out the ice. Then the ice melted slowly over thousands of years. The glaciers retreated, land opened up. People expanded north, repopulated Europe. Spread from the southern refugia back into the territories that had been frozen. The Basques stayed put. They didn't expand much, didn't migrate north with the others. They remained in their mountain homeland, kept their genetic distinctiveness, preserved their language, their culture, their genes. If the refugiate populations had high Rh-negative frequency, that would explain the Basque pattern. They're descendants of the Ice Age survivors, the people who waited out the cold, and they preserved the genetic signature of that ancient population. This theory has support. Genetic studies show the Basques have ancient ancestry. Their genes trace back to early European populations, pre-agricultural, pre-migration. The original inhabitants before farming spread from the Middle East. Most Europeans today carry a mix. Genes from the original hunter-gatherers, genes from Middle Eastern farmers who arrived 8,000 years ago, genes from steppe pastoralists who came 5,000 years ago. 3 major migrations, 3 genetic layers. The Basques have less mixing, more of the original hunter-gatherer ancestry, less of the later additions. They're closer to the pre-agricultural Europeans than anyone else on the continent, and those pre-agricultural Europeans had high Rh-negative frequency. We think, based on the Basque data, based on the patterns we see, the ancient hunter-gatherers carried this trait, passed it down. The Basques preserved it because they preserved more of that ancient ancestry. But that just pushes the question back. Why did the ancient hunter-gatherers have high Rh-negative frequency? Where did they get it? What happened in the deep past to create this pattern? Some researchers point to an even earlier event, the Neanderthal connection, or rather the lack of connection. Modern humans interbred with Neanderthals. We know this now. Genetic studies proved it. Most people today carry 1 to 2% Neanderthal DNA, fragments, pieces, inherited from ancient encounters, mixing that happened 50 to 60,000 years ago. But not everyone has the same amount. Europeans and Asians have more. Africans have less or none. The mixing happened after humans left Africa. In the Middle East, in Europe, where modern humans and Neanderthals overlapped. And here's something interesting. The genes we inherited from Neanderthals include immune system genes, genes that fight disease, genes that recognize pathogens, genes that help survival in new environments. Neanderthals lived in Europe for hundreds of thousands of years. They adapted to European diseases, European parasites, European conditions. When modern humans arrived, they were newcomers, vulnerable, susceptible to local diseases. Interbreeding with Neanderthals gave modern humans a shortcut, instant adaptation. Immune genes that already worked in Europe, protection against local diseases, a survival advantage. The humans who mixed more with Neanderthals survived better, had more children, passed on more genes, including the Neanderthal immune genes. That's why we still carry them, why they're present in modern populations. But Neanderthals were Rh positive, almost certainly, based on their genetic relationship to other hominins, based on the fact that Rh positive is ancestral, universal in primates, the default state. So mixing with Neanderthals would have introduced Rh positive genes, increased Rh positive frequency, decreased Rh negative frequency. The populations that mixed more should have less Rh negative blood. And maybe that's exactly what we see. Maybe the pattern isn't about Rh negative blood increasing. Maybe it's about Rh positive blood increasing in populations that mixed with Neanderthals, and Rh negative blood staying higher in populations that didn't mix as much. The Basques have less Neanderthal ancestry than other Europeans, not none, but less. They're more purely descended from the modern humans who first entered Europe, less mixing with Neanderthals, less introduction of Neanderthal genes, including Rh positive genes. If the original modern humans who entered Europe had high Rh negative frequency and Neanderthal mixing introduced Rh positive genes, that would explain the pattern. The Basques preserved the original frequency. Other populations shifted toward Rh positive through Neanderthal admixture. But this theory has problems. The Neanderthal mixing happened 50,000 to 60,000 years ago. That's a long time. Long enough for gene frequencies to shift dramatically. Long enough for natural selection to work. Long enough for genetic drift to randomize things. The pattern we see today shouldn't still reflect something that happened 50,000 years ago. Unless the trait is under strong selection. Unless something is actively maintaining it. Keeping it at specific frequencies in specific populations. And we're back to the same question. What's maintaining it? What advantage does Rh-negative blood provide that keeps it at 27% in Basques and 15% in other Europeans? Some researchers have suggested the advantage might be related to vitamin D. Bear with me here. This gets complicated but interesting. Vitamin D is crucial for human health, bone development, immune function, calcium absorption, lots of things. Your body makes vitamin D when sunlight hits your skin. UV radiation triggers the production. But in northern latitudes, there's less sunlight, especially in winter. Less UV radiation. Harder to make enough vitamin D. This is a problem, has been for thousands of years. Northern populations had to adapt. One adaptation is lighter skin, less melanin, allows more UV penetration, makes vitamin D production more efficient. That's why northern Europeans have light skin. It's an adaptation to low sunlight conditions. But there might be other adaptations too. Other ways the body compensates. Other genetic changes that help with vitamin D metabolism. And some researchers think Rh blood type might be involved. There's evidence that Rh-negative people process vitamin D differently, have different levels in their blood, respond differently to supplementation. The mechanism isn't clear, the research is preliminary, but there might be a connection. If Rh-negative blood helps with vitamin D metabolism in low sunlight conditions, that would explain the European pattern. Northern populations, regions with less sunlight, places where vitamin D deficiency is a risk. Higher frequencies of Rh-negative blood as an adaptation. The Basque region isn't particularly northern, but it's mountainous. Mountains create different light conditions, different UV exposure. Valleys get less direct sunlight, peaks get more. Complex patterns, maybe that matters. Maybe mountain populations face unique vitamin D challenges. And the Berbers, also mountainous, also showing elevated Rh-negative frequencies. Also living in regions with complex light environments. Maybe the pattern holds, but this is speculative. The vitamin D connection isn't proven. The evidence is suggestive but not conclusive. More research is needed. Studies with larger sample sizes, better controls, more detailed analysis. Another possibility focuses on cold adaptation. The Ice Age again. Surviving in cold climates requires specific adaptations, metabolic changes, circulatory changes, ways to maintain body temperature. Ways to survive freezing conditions. Some researchers have found differences in how Rh-negative people respond to cold. Small differences, subtle ones, but measurable. Different circulation patterns, different metabolic responses, different heat retention. If Rh-negative blood helped with cold adaptation, that would explain the Ice Age refugia pattern. The populations that survived the glacial maximum. The people who lived through the coldest periods, they might have had higher Rh-negative frequency because it helped them survive. Then as the ice melted and people expanded north, they carried that trait with them, spread it across Europe, maintained it because northern Europe is still cold, still requires cold adaptation, still benefits from whatever advantage Rh-negative blood provides. But again, the evidence is weak. The differences are small. Could be real, could be statistical artifacts, could be confounded by other factors. We don't know for sure. What we do know is the pattern exists. Rh-negative blood clusters in specific populations. Shows geographic structure, correlates with isolation, with ancient ancestry, with refugia populations, with mountain regions, with northern latitudes. That's not random. Random would look different. Random would be scattered, uneven, no clear pattern. What we see is structure. Organization, the signature of something, some force, some history, some selection pressure. The Basques are the key. They're the extreme case. The population with the highest frequency, the most isolated, the most genetically distinct, the most ancient. If we can understand why they have such high Rh-negative frequency, we might understand the whole pattern. And they're not just genetically unique, they're culturally unique too. Their language, their traditions, their identity, they've maintained separateness for thousands of years. Resisted assimilation, preserved their distinctiveness. That cultural isolation reinforced the genetic isolation. Limited intermarriage, limited gene flow, kept the population separate, kept the genetic frequencies stable, preserved whatever was there at the beginning. So the Basque people are like a genetic time capsule, a window into the past, a preserved sample of ancient European genetics. And that sample shows 27% Rh-negative blood, which suggests the ancient Europeans had high frequencies, which suggests this trait is old, ancient, fundamental to early European populations. But why? Why did ancient Europeans have high Rh-negative frequency? What happened in the deep past? What selection pressure existed that doesn't exist now? What advantage did the trait provide? We might never know. The past is gone, the conditions change, the disease is extinct, the environment's transformed. All we have are the genetic echoes, the patterns in modern populations, the frequencies that persist, the mysteries that remain. The Basques stand on their mountains, speak their ancient language, carry their unique genes. And in their blood, in that 27% who lack the Rh protein, there's a story, a history, a secret from the deep past, something that mattered once, something that shaped human evolution, something we've forgotten but our genes remember. The pattern spreads across the map, clusters and gradients, high frequencies here, lower there, pockets and concentrations, each one a clue, each one a piece of the puzzle. The Basques, the Irish, the Berbers, the scattered populations maintaining higher frequencies, all of them connected somehow, all of them sharing something. Some ancient inheritance, some prehistoric adaptation, some mystery written in blood. The pattern we see in Europe isn't random, but it's also not simple. Look at a detailed map of Rh-negative blood frequencies across the continent. You'll see something strange. It's not a clean gradient, not a smooth transition from high to low. It's messy, patchy, complex. The Basque Country sits at the peak, 27%. Then frequencies drop as you move away. But the drop isn't even. It's not like elevation on a mountain, more like a landscape with hills and valleys, peaks and dips, high spots scattered across the terrain. Western Europe shows higher frequencies overall. France averages around 15%. Britain, similar. Ireland slightly higher. These are elevated numbers, well above the global baseline, but they're not uniform within these countries. Northern France has different frequencies than southern France. Brittany shows higher numbers than Paris. Cornwall differs from London, Wales from England, Scotland from the lowlands. Each region has its own pattern, its own history, its own story. Germany sits in the middle, literally and figuratively, 14 to 15% average. But Bavaria differs from Prussia. The Rhine Valley from the Alps, regional variation everywhere you look. Move east and the numbers drop. Poland shows 12 to 13%. Czech Republic similar. The decline continues into Russia, 10 to 11% in western Russia. Lower still as you move toward Siberia. By the time you reach the Pacific coast, Rh-negative blood is rare, 5% or less. Southern Europe shows its own complexity. Spain averages 15%, but that average hides variation. Catalonia differs from Andalusia, the Mediterranean coast from the interior, and the Basque Country sits there in the north. An outlier, a spike in the data. 27% in a country that averages 15. Italy shows north-south variation. Northern Italy has higher frequencies, 15 to 16%. Central Italy lower. Southern Italy lower still. Sicily and Sardinia have their own patterns. Islands often do. Isolated populations, limited mixing, genetic drift creating local differences. The Balkans get complicated. Greece shows around 10%, Albania similar. But mountain regions show higher numbers. Isolated valleys, places where populations stayed separate, where ancient patterns persisted. Scandinavia is interesting. You'd expect high frequencies, northern latitude, Ice Age refugia nearby. Ancient populations. But the numbers are moderate, 15% in Norway and Sweden, slightly lower in Denmark. Not as high as Western Europe, not as low as Eastern Europe, somewhere in between. Why? What explains the Scandinavian pattern? Probably migration history. Scandinavia was covered in ice during the glacial maximum, uninhabitable. When the ice melted, people moved in. But where did they come from? Multiple sources, multiple migrations, mixing and blending. That complexity shows in the genetics. The pattern across Europe suggests multiple factors at work. Not one simple explanation, not one migration event, not one selection pressure. Multiple things happening. multiple histories intersecting, multiple populations mixing and separating over thousands of years. Think about what Europe looked like 10,000 years ago. The ice had just retreated. People were expanding north from the refugia. Spain, Italy, the Balkans. 3 main source populations, each with its own genetic signature, each with its own RH frequency. They spread across the newly habitable land, followed the herds, followed the forests, settled in river valleys, coastal areas, places with resources, places that could support human life. And they brought their genes with them, including their RH blood types. But they didn't spread evenly. Geography matters. Mountains create barriers, rivers create corridors, coastlines create highways. The landscape shapes movement, channels it, directs it, creates patterns of settlement and isolation. The Alps split southern from northern populations. The Pyrenees isolated the Basque country. The Carpathians created barriers in Eastern Europe. Each mountain range a genetic boundary, each valley a separate population, each isolated region maintaining its own frequencies. Then came the farmers, 8,000 years ago. Agriculture spread from the Middle East into Europe, slowly, over thousands of years, moving west and north, bringing new people, new genes, new blood types. The farmers mixed with the hunter-gatherers, sometimes peacefully, sometimes not. The mixing wasn't uniform. Some regions saw more farmer ancestry, others less. The hunter-gatherers didn't disappear. They blended, merged, their genes persisted in the mixed populations. But the mixing varied by region. Western Europe retained more hunter-gatherer ancestry. Eastern Europe got more farmer genes. The gradient we see today partly reflects that ancient mixing, that blend of populations, that merger of 2 different groups with different RH frequencies. Then came another wave, 5,000 years ago. Pastoralists from the steppes, horse riders, warriors. They swept into Europe from the east, brought new languages, new cultures, new genes. More mixing, more blending, more complexity added to the pattern. Each migration changed the genetic landscape, shifted frequencies, created new patterns, but the old patterns didn't disappear. They persisted, blended with the new, created layers, genetic archaeology, history written in blood types. The result is what we see today. A complex gradient, high in the west, lower in the east, but with variation everywhere. Regional differences, local patterns, pockets of high frequency, areas of low frequency. A mosaic, a patchwork, a genetic map that reflects thousands of years of history. But there's another layer to consider. Natural selection. We talked about possible advantages of Rh-negative blood, vitamin D metabolism, cold adaptation, disease resistance. If any of these advantages are real, they would affect the pattern, shape the frequencies, create gradients based on environmental pressures. Northern Europe has less sunlight. If Rh-negative blood helps with vitamin D, frequencies should be higher in the north. But they're not. They're higher in the west. That doesn't fit the vitamin D theory, unless other factors override it, unless the migration history is stronger than the selection pressure. Cold adaptation might fit better. Western Europe was the refugia during the Ice Age, the place where people survived the cold. If Rh-negative blood helped with cold survival, high frequencies in the West make sense. The descendants of the Ice Age survivors, the people who made it through, still carrying the trait that helped them. But Eastern Europe gets cold too. Very cold. Colder than Western Europe in many places. If cold adaptation drives Rh-negative frequency, Eastern Europe should have high numbers. But it doesn't. The pattern doesn't fit perfectly. Maybe the advantage isn't environmental. Maybe it's about disease, specific diseases, specific pathogens, things that were present in some regions but not others, things that created selection pressure in some populations but not others. Europe has a complex disease history, plagues, epidemics, waves of infections sweeping across the continent. Different regions affected differently. Different populations hit harder or lighter. Disease creates strong selection pressure, can shift gene frequencies rapidly, can create patterns that persist for generations. If Rh-negative blood provided resistance to some ancient disease, that could explain regional variation. The disease was common in some areas, rare in others. Selection pressure varied. Frequencies diverged. The pattern we see today reflects ancient epidemics, ancient plagues, ancient selection events we've forgotten, but we know what diseases, don't know when, don't know where. The evidence is gone. The pathogens extinct or evolved. The selection pressure vanished. All we have is the pattern in blood types, the frequencies that remain, the genetic signature of something that happened long ago. There's also genetic drift to consider. Random chance. In small populations, gene frequencies can shift randomly. No selection needed, no advantage required. Just chance. Random variation. Some people have more children, some have fewer. Over generations, frequencies drift, change, move away from the starting point. Genetic drift is stronger in small populations, isolated groups, mountain villages, island communities, places where the breeding population is limited, where everyone is related, where random events have big effects. These populations can develop unusual gene frequencies just by chance. Europe has thousands of small populations, isolated valleys, remote islands, mountain villages, each one potentially drifting, each one developing its own frequencies, each one contributing to the overall pattern. The mosaic we see might partly reflect this random drift, this genetic noise, this chance variation. Untangling all these factors is nearly impossible. Migration and selection and drift, all working together, all creating patterns, all leaving signatures, all blending into the complex gradient we see today. Researchers try to separate them, build models, run simulations, test hypotheses. But the past is complicated. History is messy. Genetics reflects that mess. What we can say is this: the European pattern is real. It's not random. It's structured. It reflects history, reflects geography, reflects thousands of years of human movement and mixing and adaptation. The Basques sit at one extreme, the eastern populations at the other, and between them, a gradient, a transition, a genetic landscape shaped by time and chance and selection and isolation. The pattern tells us Rh-negative blood is old in Europe, ancient, present in the earliest populations, maintained through time, preserved in isolated groups, spread through migration, shaped by mixing, influenced by selection. The result of everything that happened, everything that shaped European populations over the last 10,000 years. But the pattern also tells us we don't fully understand it, can't fully explain it. The details are too complex, the history too long, the factors too numerous. We see the result but can't reconstruct the process, can't trace the exact path from then to now, can't identify every force that shaped the frequencies. That's frustrating for scientists. They want answers, want explanations, want to understand completely. But genetics is humbling, history is humbling. The past resists simple explanations, resists neat theories, resists our attempts to pin it down. All we can do is observe, measure, document, and acknowledge the limits of our knowledge. The European gradient is a mystery, not as dramatic as the Basque anomaly, not as striking as the global pattern, but mysterious nonetheless. Complex, layered, rich with history, rich with information. If we could read it correctly, if we could decode it fully, if we had all the pieces, but we don't. We have fragments, clues, hints, and questions. Always more questions. Alright, so we've talked about the patterns, the numbers, the maps, the puzzle pieces scattered across Europe and the world. But what about the theories that go way outside the usual lines? The wild ideas. The stuff that sounds more like science fiction or a late-night internet rabbit hole than anything you'd hear in a classroom. Because when people run into a mystery like Rh-negative blood, and the regular answers just don't feel satisfying, the mind goes wandering. Sometimes far, sometimes really far. Let's look at some of the stranger theories out there. Not because they're likely to be true, but because they show how humans try to fill gaps in what we know. They tell us about our hopes, our fears, and the way we handle things that don't seem to add up. The first big one is probably the most famous, the alien theory. You've probably heard it before, maybe in a YouTube comment or a late-night documentary. It goes something like this. Rh-negative blood is so strange, so rare, so hard to explain that it must come from somewhere else. Not just another place on Earth. Somewhere much farther away. In this story, aliens visited Earth a long time ago. Maybe they came to study humans, or maybe they had their own reasons. The theory usually says they mixed their DNA with ours. They either did this by accident or on purpose to create a new kind of human. The result? People with Rh-negative blood. The argument often goes like this. Rh-negative blood doesn't mix well with Rh-positive blood. That's weird for a trait that's supposed to come from our own species. Human mothers with Rh-negative blood can have problems when carrying Rh-positive babies. That's not how things work with most traits. So the theory says maybe Rh-negative blood isn't entirely human. Some versions of the alien theory get even wilder. They say that people with Rh-negative blood have special abilities, maybe stronger intuition, maybe they're more sensitive, maybe they're even more likely to have psychic experiences. Sometimes people point to the Basque population with their high Rh-negative numbers and say, look, they're different. Maybe they're the descendants of the original experiment. Of course, there's no real evidence for any of this. Scientists have never found alien DNA in human blood. They've never discovered a gene that looks like it came from another planet. There's no spaceship buried under the Pyrenees. But the idea won't go away. It pops up again and again whenever people talk about Rh-negative blood. Why does this idea stick around? Maybe it's because the mystery feels so big. Regular human stories don't seem big enough to explain a trait that's this rare, this stubborn, and this strange. The alien idea is exciting. It makes people feel like they're part of something huge, something cosmic. And here's the thing. Humans love a good mystery. When we don't have answers, we make up stories. Sometimes those stories are about gods or lost civilizations. Sometimes they're about visitors from the stars. It doesn't mean the stories are true, but it tells you something about the way we deal with the unknown. There's another version of the outsider theory. Not aliens this time, but ancient lost civilizations. Think Atlantis, Lemuria, all those places that get talked about in old legends and New Age books. The idea is simple. Maybe Rh-negative blood comes from a group of people who were different from everyone else. Maybe they were more advanced, or maybe they just had different genes. When their civilization vanished, swallowed by the sea, destroyed by a disaster, lost to history, their blood type survived in a few places, maybe in the Basques, maybe in other hidden corners of the world. Some people point to old stories about gods or giants living among early humans. They say, maybe those weren't just myths. Maybe those were real people with different blood. Sometimes the story gets tied to the Nephilim, the mysterious beings mentioned in ancient texts. The Nephilim are supposed to be the children of angels and humans. Some versions of the theory say maybe the Nephilim had Rh-negative blood. Maybe their descendants are still here. Again, there's no real evidence. No ruins of Atlantis filled with skeletons that have only Rh-negative blood. No fossils showing a separate branch of humans with a totally different blood system. But the idea sticks around for the same reason as the alien theory. It's dramatic. It makes people feel like they're connected to a lost world, a hidden history. Then there are the religious theories. These often overlap with the lost civilization ideas, but sometimes they go in a different direction. Some people claim that certain blood types are pure or come directly from ancient biblical figures. Maybe Rh-negative blood is supposed to be the blood of Adam, or of the ancient Israelites, or of some other chosen group. This can get complicated and sometimes dangerous. Throughout history, people have tried to link blood with religion or with being chosen. It rarely ends well. Scientists push back hard against these ideas because blood type doesn't tell you anything about your value as a person or your connection to any ancient prophet. Still, the stories go on. People want to find meaning in their blood. They want to feel special or chosen or connected to something bigger than themselves. It's human nature. There's another fringe idea that pops up now and then. Not about aliens or Atlantis, but about deliberate genetic engineering. The story goes like this. Thousands of years ago, someone figured out how to change human genes. Maybe it was a lost group of scientists. Maybe it was a secret society. Maybe it was travelers from another dimension. The details change, but the basic idea is the same. Rh-negative blood isn't an accident of nature. Someone made it on purpose. The why changes too. Some say it was to make people immune to certain diseases. Some say it was to create a group of people who couldn't be controlled by regular humans. Some say it was just an experiment to see what would happen. The evidence? Usually just that Rh-negative blood is so rare and so hard to explain. Most scientists roll their eyes at this one. There's no proof that anyone in the ancient world could do gene editing. No ancient CRISPR. No secret lab under Stonehenge. But the idea keeps coming back because it fits the pattern. Rh-negative blood feels like a mystery, so people reach for big answers. Some theories don't go quite as far as aliens or hidden scientists. They stick to the idea of ancient humans, but with a twist. For example, maybe Rh-negative blood came from a different kind of human, not Homo sapiens but Neanderthals, Denisovans, or some other extinct cousin. This theory says that when modern humans met these other groups, they sometimes had children together. Some of those children carried genes for Rh-negative blood. Over time, those genes spread through parts of the population, especially in places where people mixed with Neanderthals or Denisovans. That's why you see higher rates in some regions and not others. It's an interesting idea, and there's at least a little evidence that humans and Neanderthals did mix. Modern Europeans and Asians have around 1 to 4% Neanderthal DNA. But so far, scientists haven't found a Neanderthal skeleton they can test for blood type. We don't know what kind of Rh genes they had. It's possible, but we can't say for sure. And there's another problem. If Rh-negative blood came from Neanderthals or Denisovans, you'd expect to see it in places where those groups lived. But the highest rates today don't line up perfectly with Neanderthal sites. The Basques, for example, have lots of Rh-negative blood, but there's no special Neanderthal connection there. The pattern doesn't quite fit. Still, this theory feels more grounded than the alien or Atlantis ideas. It's about ancient humans meeting and mixing. It's not impossible, it's just unproven. Then there's the theory that Rh-negative blood is actually a genetic throwback, a kind of reappearance of an old trait that most humans lost. In this story, early humans had both Rh-positive and Rh-negative genes. Over time, Rh-positive became more common, maybe because it helped people survive certain diseases or environments. But in some isolated groups, Rh-negative stuck around, maybe because of geography or culture or just random chance. This isn't really a fringe theory in the same way as the others, but some people take it further. They say that Rh-negative blood is a marker of ancient wisdom or lost abilities. Maybe the people who carry it are more in tune with nature, or have special mental powers. Again, there's no scientific proof for any of this. But the idea is out there. Some people see Rh-negative blood as a sign of purity or difference. Others see it as a kind of curse. There are old stories, especially in folklore, about people whose blood doesn't mix with the rest of society. Sometimes they're feared. Sometimes they're respected. Sometimes both at once. In some places, people with Rh-negative blood are said to be blue bloods. This has nothing to do with royal blood, but with the way veins look under pale skin. The idea is that these people are different, set apart. Maybe they're descendants of old nobility. Maybe they're not quite human. These stories go back centuries, and they show up in lots of cultures. And then there's the vampire angle. Yes, really. Some people have noticed that Rh stands for rhesus monkey, and that Rh-negative blood supposedly can't be traced back to primates. So they say, maybe people with Rh-negative blood are descended from something else. Sometimes that something else is vampires, or another kind of non-human creature. It's a fun story, but there's zero real evidence for it. Let's pause here. Why do these stories keep coming up? Why does Rh-negative blood inspire so much creativity, so many big ideas? Part of it is the nature of the mystery. When science doesn't have a neat answer, the door is open for all kinds of possibilities. But there's something deeper. Blood has always felt important to humans. Its life, its family, its identity. When something about blood doesn't fit the usual patterns, people pay attention. They invent stories to explain it. Stories that connect them to the past or to something beyond the ordinary. Fringe theories often pop up when people feel left out by regular history. Maybe they don't trust official stories. Maybe they want to feel special. Maybe they just like the idea that the world is bigger and stranger than it looks. Rh-negative blood is the perfect hook for those feelings. It's rare, it's mysterious, and it refuses to be easily explained. But there's a cost. These theories can sometimes lead to strange beliefs about race, identity, or superiority. That's dangerous ground. Science tells us that blood type doesn't make you better or worse. It doesn't make you more or less human. It's just a quirk of genetics, a roll of the dice that happened thousands of years ago. Still, the stories keep coming. The internet only makes it easier. One person posts a wild idea, and pretty soon there are forums, videos, even whole books about it. Some people really believe. Others just enjoy the ride. It's important to remember that mysteries don't always need dramatic answers. Sometimes the real story is more complicated. Layers of migration, chance, and history all tangled together. But that doesn't mean the wild theories aren't interesting. They're part of the human story too. There's something comforting about thinking you might be special, that you're connected to a hidden past, that your blood carries secrets nobody else knows. It's a very old feeling. It's part of why people believe in chosen bloodlines, lost tribes, secret societies. Rh-negative blood just gives that feeling a new home. Even though scientists haven't found aliens, or lost civilizations, or secret genetic engineers, the search for answers goes on. People will always wonder about what makes them different. They'll always tell stories to fill the gaps. And here's a thought. Sometimes, the best thing about a mystery is that it stays a mystery. If we had all the answers, maybe we'd stop looking. Maybe we'd stop dreaming up stories about ancient astronauts, or lost cities, or blue-blooded nobles hiding in the mountains. Rh-negative blood will probably keep inspiring these stories for a long time. As long as there are people who love a good puzzle and people who want to feel special, the wild theories will keep coming. Maybe that's not such a bad thing. Maybe it's just what humans do. We see something strange, and we start imagining, but there's also value in looking for real answers, in asking hard questions and checking the facts and seeing where the evidence leads, even if the truth is messier or smaller or less exciting than the stories we tell. For now, Rh-negative blood is a reminder that there are still things we don't fully understand, still puzzles to solve, still questions waiting in our own veins. And that's okay. Sometimes not knowing is its own kind of wonder. So what do actual scientists think? Let's look at the real theories, the ones built on evidence, not just imagination. So, now that we've left the wild theories behind, the aliens, the lost civilizations, the secret experiments, let's get grounded. What does real science say about Rh-negative blood? How do researchers explain something that feels so rare and stubborn, but is sitting right there in our veins? The answers aren't flashy. They're not about ancient astronauts or hidden gods, but they're still pretty fascinating once you get into them. Let's start at the beginning. First, you need to know what the Rh factor is, in the most basic way. There's a protein that sits on the surface of your red blood cells. If you have this protein, you're Rh positive. If you don't, you're Rh negative. That's it. The protein is called the D antigen, but you don't need to remember the fancy name. Just think of it as a coat on your blood cells. Most people have it, some people don't. So why does this protein matter? Well, it's what causes some of those famous problems with blood transfusions and pregnancy. If an Rh-negative person gets Rh-positive blood, their body can react badly. And if an Rh-negative mom carries an Rh-positive baby, her immune system might attack the baby's blood. That's why doctors pay a lot of attention to this protein. But where did it come from? And why do only some people lack it? Here's where the science gets interesting. Most animals, almost all primates, like monkeys and apes, have the Rh protein. Even chimpanzees, our closest cousins, have it. So for a long time, scientists thought having the protein was the normal state. Losing it was the odd part. That makes sense, right? The thing that's rare is usually the thing that changed. Researchers started looking at the gene that controls this protein. It's called the RHD gene. If the gene works, you get the protein and you're Rh positive. If the gene is missing or broken, you don't get the protein. You're Rh negative. Simple as that. But here's the twist: what actually happened to the gene? It turns out, in most people with Rh negative blood, the RHD gene is just gone, completely deleted. It's not just switched off. It's missing, like someone tore out a page from a book. Scientists found that in most Europeans who are Rh negative, the entire gene is deleted. In other words, at some point, there was a genetic accident. The gene got lost. People with that missing gene survived, had children, and passed it on. But that's not the only way to be Rh negative. In Africa and Asia, some people have a broken version of the gene. It's still there, but it doesn't work right. It's like having a recipe with a missing step. The result is the same, no Rh protein, but the way it happened is different. This tells scientists that the Rh negative trait appeared more than once. It wasn't a single event. It's a case of convergent evolution when the same trait shows up in different places for different reasons. You might wonder, why would losing the Rh protein happen at all? Most changes in the body don't just pop up for no reason. Sometimes, though, genes break by accident. A tiny mistake during cell division. A chunk of DNA gets left behind. Most of the time, these accidents are bad, but sometimes they just don't matter. Or, on rare occasions, they might even help in certain environments. Let's talk about Europe for a moment. That's where the highest rates of Rh-negative blood are found, especially among the Basques, as we saw earlier. But it's not just them. Around 15% of people in Spain, France, and the British Isles are Rh-negative. In other parts of the world, it's much lower. In East Asia, for example, it's less than 1%. So why is Rh-negative blood so common in these pockets of Europe? Here's one scientific idea that gets a lot of attention. The founder effect. This is a basic concept in genetics. Imagine a small group of people splits off from a bigger group. Maybe they move to a mountain valley, or an island, or just a faraway place. If one or two people in that small group are Rh-negative, their kids might be too. And since the group is small, the trait doesn't get washed out by all the Rh-positive genes from the bigger group. Over generations, this small group can end up with a lot more Rh-negative people than the rest of the world. Not because the trait is special or better, but just because of chance. It's like shuffling a deck of cards and ending up with a weird hand. If nobody new joins the group, the pattern sticks. That's one reason scientists think the Basques, and maybe other groups in Western Europe, have so much Rh-negative blood. Their ancestors stayed in one place for a long time. They didn't mix much with outsiders. The Rh-negative gene didn't get diluted, it just kept being passed down. But that's not the whole story. If it was just about being isolated, you'd expect to see other groups with high rates too. And you do sometimes, but not everywhere. So researchers started asking, could there be a reason people with Rh-negative blood did better in some places than others? Is there a hidden benefit? Here's where the theories get more complicated. Some scientists thought maybe Rh-negative blood offered protection against certain diseases. This isn't a new idea. We know that some blood traits, like sickle cell, help protect against malaria. Could the same thing be true for Rh-negative blood? The evidence is mixed. There's no clear proof that being Rh-negative protects you from any major disease. Some early studies suggested a tiny advantage against certain viruses, but nothing big enough to explain the pattern. In fact, being Rh-negative can be a disadvantage in some ways, like the problems with pregnancy or the risk during blood transfusions. Here's another angle. Some researchers wonder if Rh-negative blood might have mattered more in ancient times, when people lived in small groups and didn't travel much. Maybe the trait was rare at first, but once it appeared, it stuck around in isolated places. Over thousands of years, these pockets grew, while the rest of the world stayed mostly Rh-positive. Genetics can be weird like that. Sometimes a trait hangs on, not because it's good or bad, but just because of who happened to have kids and where they lived. The world is full of these random patterns. Some are easy to see, like red hair in Scotland. Others, like blood types, are hidden until you start looking closely. Now, let's talk about another theory, balancing selection. This is a fancy term, but it's pretty simple. It means that sometimes nature keeps two different versions of a gene in the population, because each version helps in a different way. For example, people with one copy of the sickle cell gene are less likely to get malaria. That's why the sickle cell gene hasn't disappeared, even though having two copies can make you very sick. Could something like that be happening with Rh-negative blood? Maybe. Some researchers think there might be a hidden benefit to having one Rh-negative gene and one Rh-positive gene. Maybe it helps with fighting off certain infections, or with surviving tough pregnancies. But so far, the evidence isn't strong. It's more of a guess than a proven fact. And then there's the simplest answer of all. Maybe there's no big reason. Maybe Rh-negative blood is just a quirk of history, a genetic accident that stuck around for no special purpose. This might sound unsatisfying, but it happens more often than you'd think. Human genes are full of weird leftovers, traits that don't help or hurt much, but just drift along through the generations. Let's zoom in on the science for a second. Researchers have mapped out the Rh genes in great detail. They know which versions are common in Europe, which ones are found in Africa and Asia. They can even track how the gene changed over time by looking at ancient bones and DNA. The story they see is complicated. The Rh-negative gene popped up in different places, at different times. It didn't spread in a straight line. It's more like a patchwork, with different patterns in different places. Here's something cool. Scientists have managed to extract ancient DNA from human skeletons that are thousands of years old. Sometimes, they can tell what blood type a person had, even after all that time. The earliest clear signs of Rh-negative genes show up in Europe, in people who lived about 8,000 years ago. That's pretty recent, if you think about how long humans have been around. Before that, it's hard to say. DNA breaks down over time, and the older the bones, the harder it gets to find the right clues. So, we don't really know if the first modern humans had the Rh-negative gene or not. It's possible, but not proven. There's another piece of the puzzle: migration. Humans didn't always live where they do now. For tens of thousands of years, people moved around, following herds, chasing good weather, or just exploring. Every time a group moved, they brought their genes with them. Sometimes a small group would split off and start a new population. If they had a high rate of Rh-negative blood, their descendants did too. Over time, this created the strange map we see today. Lots of Rh-negative people in Western Europe. Not many in Asia or Africa. Just a few in the Americas, mostly from European settlers. The pattern isn't perfect, but it fits with what we know about ancient migration. Now, what about natural selection? Did nature choose for or against Rh-negative blood? There's no easy answer. In some cases, being Rh-negative can cause problems. The biggest one is called hemolytic disease of the newborn. It happens when an Rh-negative mother's immune system attacks her Rh-positive baby. Before modern medicine, this could be deadly. So, you'd think natural selection would get rid of the Rh-negative gene. But it didn't. Why not? Here's one idea. Most people only have 1 or 2 children. If the first child is Rh-positive, the mother's body usually doesn't react until the second pregnancy. So, the risk is lower than you might think. Plus, in small, isolated groups, the odds of 2 Rh-positive parents were lower. The trait could survive, even with some risk. It's also possible that the disadvantage of being Rh-negative was balanced out by other factors. Maybe there were hidden benefits that we haven't discovered yet. Or maybe it just didn't matter enough to be wiped out. Here's a twist. Some scientists have looked for differences in health, personality, or even intelligence between Rh-negative and Rh-positive people. So far, they haven't found anything major. There are a few small studies that found tiny differences, but nothing that points to a big effect. For most people, being Rh-negative doesn't change daily life at all. It's just a detail on your medical chart. Let's talk about blood transfusions for a second. Before doctors understood blood types, transfusions were risky. Sometimes people got the wrong type of blood and died. Once scientists found out about the Rh factor, they could match donors and patients more safely. This made a huge difference, especially during wars and emergencies. Today, if you're Rh-negative, doctors know to give you the right blood. It's routine. No mystery. But even with our modern knowledge, the question sticks around: why does this trait exist at all? Why did some people lose the gene while others kept it? Why do some groups have so much of it and others almost none? The honest answer is, we don't fully know. The best guess is still the simplest random chance, mixed with a few bits of history. A genetic accident thousands of years ago. A small group living on the edge of Europe. A pattern that stuck, simply because it could. Let's look at other animals for a second. Do they have anything like Rh-negative blood? Not really. Most primates have the Rh protein. In fact, that's why it's called Rh. It was first discovered in rhesus monkeys. Scientists tried to mix monkey blood with rabbit blood and noticed a strange reaction. That's how they found the protein in the first place. It's not that Rh-negative people are less monkey than the rest of us. It's just a missing bit of protein. Some researchers have looked for similar traits in other mammals. They haven't found anything exactly like the human pattern. That doesn't mean Rh-negative blood is alien or strange. It just means evolution takes different paths in different species. What's normal for humans might be rare in other animals. And vice versa. There's also the question of why the Rh-negative gene didn't spread more. If it's not dangerous in most cases, and sometimes even goes unnoticed, why isn't it more common worldwide? The answer seems to be that it started in a small group and didn't have any big advantage. In some places, the gene just never took hold. In others, it was lost over time. That's how genetics works. Sometimes a trait just misses the boat. Now, let's talk about the future. Scientists are still studying the Rh gene, trying to learn more about how it works and why it matters. New tools like gene sequencing let them look at DNA in ways we couldn't before. Maybe someday they'll find a hidden reason for Rh-negative blood, a disease it helps fight, or a clue to ancient migration. Or maybe not. Sometimes the answer really is just chance. It's worth thinking about what this means. For all our science and technology, there are still things about the human body that we don't fully understand. Blood is one of the oldest mysteries. People have been trying to unlock its secrets for thousands of years. We know more now than ever before, but some questions are still out there. And here's where it gets philosophical for a minute. Rh-negative blood reminds us that nature isn't always tidy. It doesn't always make sense. Sometimes traits stick around for no reason. Sometimes a random accident in the past shapes the lives of millions of people today. There's something a little humbling about that. It's easy to fall into the trap of thinking everything has a purpose, that every trait must have a reason. But the story of Rh-negative blood is messier. It's a reminder that history, whether in our genes or in our world, is full of accidents, full of surprises, full of things that just happened and then kept going. Science doesn't always give us the big dramatic answers we want. Sometimes the truth is slow and quiet. The gene deleted here, a family moving there, a pattern that sticks by luck. But those quiet answers are still part of the story. They connect us to the past just as much as any legend or wild theory. So, what do we know for sure? Rh-negative blood is caused by a missing or broken gene. The pattern is strongest in certain parts of Europe because of history and isolation. There's no proof of a big benefit or a hidden curse. It's not a mark of ancient aliens or lost civilizations or anything supernatural. It's a genetic quirk, strange, but not impossible. But that doesn't mean it's boring. In fact, the real science is just as interesting as the wild theories. It shows us how small changes, far in the past, can echo through time. It reminds us that we're all connected to each other, to our ancestors, to the long story of life on Earth. And even though the answers aren't magical, they still have a kind of wonder. Who would have guessed that a missing protein could shape so many stories, from medical textbooks to legends about blue-blooded nobles? Who would have thought that a tiny accident, thousands of years ago, would still be making doctors scratch their heads today? Every time you hear about Rh-negative blood, you're hearing a story that started long before you were born. A story written in DNA, carried from parent to child, from one corner of the world to another. It's a story with gaps and puzzles, but that's what makes it worth telling. We may never know exactly why the Rh-negative gene appeared, or why it stuck around in some places and not others. But that's okay. Not every mystery needs a neat solution. Sometimes just knowing the facts, the way the pieces fit, the way the patterns spread, is enough. And here's the thing. Even in the world of science, wonder never really goes away. There's always another question, another clue, another twist in the story. Rh-negative blood is just one example. It's a reminder that even the most ordinary details of our bodies can hold secrets, waiting to be discovered. So, the next time you hear someone talk about rare blood or wonder where their own blood type came from, you'll know the real story. It's not about aliens or lost cities. It's about genes, history, and the strange, winding path that brought us here. And if you're still curious, you're not alone. Scientists are too. They're still searching, still testing, still trying to fill in the blanks. The answers might come slowly, but they're coming. One drop of blood at a time. And now, let's look at one of the most interesting scientific ideas about Rh-negative blood. It's a theory that connects us not just to each other, but to our ancient cousins. The Neanderthals, the Denisovans, and the other humans who once walked beside us. This is where the story takes another turn. So now let's dive into one of the strangest ideas in the whole Rh-negative story, the possible connection to Neanderthals. If you've heard this theory before, You know how wild it sounds, but let's take a careful look at what the science actually says. We're not talking about internet rumors or half-baked ideas. We're talking about real research, DNA samples, and the ancient history of our own species. Start by picturing Europe and Western Asia about 50,000 years ago. It wasn't empty. It wasn't just early humans wandering around. Neanderthals lived there. Real people, not monsters. They made tools, hunted, cared for their families. For thousands of years, Neanderthals and modern humans shared the same land. And then, something changed. Modern humans spread across Europe. Over time, Neanderthals disappeared. But here's the thing. Before they vanished, the two groups met. And they didn't just glare at each other across a river. They mixed. We know this for a fact from DNA studies. Most people outside Africa today have a little bit of Neanderthal DNA, usually around 1 to 2%. It's written in our genes. That's where the question comes in. Could Rh-negative blood be a legacy from Neanderthals? Did we get this trait by mixing with our ancient cousins? Or is it just a coincidence? Let's check the facts. First, what do we actually know about Neanderthal blood? Not much, honestly. Blood doesn't last for thousands of years. It dries up, turns to dust. But DNA does survive, at least sometimes. In the last 15 years, scientists have pulled DNA out of Neanderthal bones. They've read their genetic code, bit by bit. It's like piecing together an ancient puzzle. Researchers have searched these ancient genomes for clues about blood types, not just Rh, but also the ABO system, the one that gives you type A, B, AB, or O. In some cases, they've found enough DNA to make a good guess. It looks like some Neanderthals had the O blood type. Some may have had A. But what about the Rh factor? The answer isn't so clear. The problem is, the part of the DNA that controls the Rh protein is complicated. It's made up of several different genes. Sometimes, the ancient DNA is too damaged to read that part. In a few lucky samples, though, scientists have found enough to look for the RHD gene, the one that makes people Rh positive or Rh negative. Here's what they found. Some Neanderthal DNA samples seem to have versions of the RHD gene that are different from most modern humans. In rare cases, these versions look a little like the broken or missing gene that causes Rh-negative blood. But there's no smoking gun. No sample where the gene is clearly gone, like in most Rh-negative people today. So, does this mean Neanderthals were Rh-negative? Not exactly. The evidence just isn't there. At best, we can say that some Neanderthals may have had a version of the gene that was less active, or didn't make as much of the protein. But it's not the same as the complete gene deletion found in most modern Rh-negative people, especially in Europe. But here's where it gets interesting. Even if Neanderthals didn't have the exact same form of Rh-negative blood, they still had different blood genes compared to modern humans. And when the two groups mixed, they shared their genes. Some of those genes spread into the human population and stuck around. Scientists have actually tracked which parts of our DNA came from Neanderthals. It's not just random bits. Some of the Neanderthal DNA in our bodies today affects our skin, our hair, even our immune systems. In fact, one of the biggest areas where Neanderthal genes show up is in the way our bodies fight germs. That's important because blood types, including the Rh factor, can play a role in the immune system. The proteins on our blood cells help the body tell what's us and what's not us. When we mixed with Neanderthals, we may have picked up genes that helped us survive in new environments or fight off strange diseases. But when scientists looked for a direct link between Neanderthal DNA and the main Rh-negative gene, they didn't find it. The missing RHD gene in most Europeans looks like it happened after the last Neanderthals were gone. In other words, the gene deletion is more recent than our mixing with Neanderthals. It probably didn't come from them. Still, there's another angle. Some researchers think the story isn't just about one gene. It's about a whole set of genes, all working together. Some of these genes may have come from Neanderthals or even from other ancient humans, like the Denisovans. Over thousands of years, these genes mixed and matched in different ways. Maybe, just maybe, this shuffling set the stage for the Rh-negative gene to appear. Think of it like baking. You need the right ingredients to make a cake. Maybe the flour and sugar came from one place, but the eggs came from somewhere else. The final recipe is something new. In the same way, the mix of genes from Neanderthals, Denisovans, and modern humans might have made it possible for the Rh-negative deletion to happen, and for people with that trait to survive. But again, the evidence isn't perfect. Most scientists agree that while we carry some Neanderthal DNA, the main Rh-negative gene in Europe isn't directly from them. It's more likely a homegrown accident, a genetic change that happened in our own species after Neanderthals were already gone. So why does this theory keep coming up? Part of it is the timing. The highest rates of Rh-negative blood are found in places where Neanderthals once lived. Western Europe, especially around Spain and France, was full of Neanderthal sites. It's tempting to draw a line between the two, but as we've seen, genetics doesn't always work that way. Another reason is that people love a good mystery. There's something exciting about the idea that we might carry a hidden marker from another kind of human. It makes us feel connected to a lost world. In a way, it's true we do carry Neanderthal DNA, just not the exact gene that makes us Rh-negative. Let's pause for a second and look at the Denisovans. These were another group of ancient humans related to Neanderthals but living further east, mostly in Asia. Scientists found their bones in a cave in Siberia. At first, nobody knew they were different from Neanderthals. But the DNA told a new story. Denisovan DNA shows up in modern people too, especially in Asia and in people from places like Papua New Guinea. In some cases, Denisovan genes seem to help with things like living at high altitudes. But so far, there's no clear link between Denisovan DNA and the Rh-negative gene. The highest rates of Rh-negative blood are in Western Europe, not in the parts of the world where Denisovan ancestry is strongest. Still, the Denisovan story shows how complex our family tree really is. We're not descended from just one group. We're the result of many meetings, many mixings over thousands of years. Each group brought something new to the table. If you step back, you can see how this all fits together. The world was a lot messier back then. Small groups of humans, Neanderthals, and Denisovans moved around, bumped into each other, sometimes fought, sometimes shared. Genes passed from one group to another. Over time, most of these ancient people disappeared, but their genes lingered on, hidden in our DNA. So, where does this leave the Rh-negative mystery? The short answer is, we don't have proof that it came from Neanderthals or Denisovans. The gene deletion that causes Rh-negative blood in most Europeans looks like it happened after those ancient groups were gone. It's a mutation that probably appeared in a small group of humans and then spread for reasons we still don't fully understand. But here's the twist. The fact that we even ask about a Neanderthal connection says something about how we see ourselves. We know we're not alone in our family tree. We know we carry pieces of the past inside us. When we look at an unusual trait, like Rh-negative blood, it's natural to wonder if it's a relic from another kind of human. It's not just about curiosity. It's about identity. We want to know why some people are different, why some traits are rare, why the map of human blood types looks the way it does. The Neanderthal theory is appealing because it offers a simple answer. Maybe it came from them. But as we've seen, the real answer is more complicated. Let's return to the DNA for a second. When scientists look for Neanderthal ancestry in modern people, they don't just find one or two genes. They find dozens, maybe hundreds, spread across the genome. Each gene tells a tiny piece of the story. Some affect our skin. Some influence our brains. Some maybe help us resist illness. But the missing RHD gene, the main cause of Rh-negative blood, doesn't match the Neanderthal version. In fact, if you look at the timeline, the gene deletion probably happened within the last 10,000 years. That's after modern humans settled in Europe, after they started farming, maybe even after they built the first villages. Neanderthals were already gone by then. It looks like the Rh-negative gene is a new trait, at least in terms of deep history. But that doesn't mean Neanderthals have nothing to do with the story. They shaped the genetic landscape of Europe. They changed the way genes flowed through ancient populations. When we mixed with them, we inherited a lot of traits, some helpful, some harmless, some maybe even risky. The way our bodies respond to disease, to sunlight, to cold weather, all of that was shaped by these ancient meetings. So, is it possible that the Neanderthal legacy set the stage for the Rh-negative mutation to survive? Maybe. Imagine a world where humans with mixed ancestry were more likely to survive certain challenges. Maybe their bodies were better at handling new diseases or different foods. Maybe, in just the right combination, the missing RHD gene didn't cause as many problems as it might have elsewhere. There's another angle too. Some scientists think the ancient mixing of genes may have changed the way our immune systems work. If people with certain mixtures of modern and Neanderthal genes had better survival, that could explain why some rare blood traits like Rh negative managed to stick around. But again, there's no direct proof. It's an open question, one of many in human genetics. Let's look at another bit of evidence. In some animals, you see similar patterns, rare traits that only show up in certain places, or in groups that split off from the main population. Sometimes these traits appear after two groups mix and then separate again. The new mix of genes creates room for new mutations to appear, and sometimes those mutations survive by chance. That might be what happened with Rh negative blood. Maybe the mixing of modern humans with Neanderthals and Denisovans created a genetic melting pot. In that mix, a rare mutation like the deletion of the RHD gene could appear, and then spread in a small group. Over thousands of years, the pattern stuck. But, to be clear, most scientists don't think Rh-negative blood is a direct Neanderthal gift. The timeline doesn't match. The gene isn't the same. The places with the most Rh-negative people don't always line up with the places where Neanderthals lived the longest. So why do people keep looking for a Neanderthal link? Part of it is the mystery. Part of it is the human urge to connect the dots. We see two strange things, Neanderthals and Rh-negative blood, and we want them to fit together. It's a natural instinct. But the real story is more tangled. Here's something else to think about. When scientists look at the genes that control blood types, they find that the same mutations can happen in different places at different times. This is called convergent evolution. It's like two groups of people coming up with the same idea, even though they never met. In Africa and Asia, there are rare forms of the Rh-negative gene that are different from the one in Europe. They didn't come from Neanderthals either. They just happened by chance in different places. That tells us something important. The human story isn't just about big events. It's about small accidents repeated over and over until they leave a mark. The Rh-negative gene is one of those marks. It's not a sign of ancient aliens or lost tribes or even direct Neanderthal heritage. It's a sign that evolution is full of surprises. Still, the Neanderthal theory sticks around for a reason. It reminds us that our family tree is wide and wild, that we're all carrying pieces of ancient history hidden in our DNA. Even if Rh-negative blood didn't come from Neanderthals, the mystery makes us look closer at who we are. And there's something kind of beautiful about that. We're not just the children of one group or one place. We're the result of thousands of meetings, thousands of migrations, thousands of random twists. Each trait, each gene has a story. Some stories are clear, others are hidden, waiting to be found. When you think about Rh-negative blood, you're looking at one puzzle among many. It's a mystery that takes you all the way back past your parents, past the first farmers, past the Ice Age, all the way to the edge of what we can know. The Neanderthal connection is just one thread in a much bigger tapestry. So to sum it up in plain words, the evidence doesn't show that Rh-negative blood came from Neanderthals. But the question itself opens a window into our past. It makes us wonder, makes us dig deeper, makes us see just how complicated and strange our own history can be. And as science moves forward, who knows what we'll find? Every year, new bones are dug up, new DNA is sequenced, new pieces of the puzzle appear. Maybe one day someone will find a Neanderthal skeleton with a missing RHD gene. Maybe not. For now, the best answer is that Rh-negative blood is a quirk of our own species, shaped by time, chance, and the long dance of genes across the ages. But whether Neanderthals are part of the story or not, one thing is clear. Rh-negative blood remains one of the strangest mysteries in the history of our bodies. And as we'll see in the next chapter, there's something else about Rh-negative people that keeps scientists and storytellers up at night. Something even stranger, hiding in plain sight. Let's slow down and take a close look at the physical traits connected to Rh-negative blood. When people talk about Rh-negative, they often focus on the genetics, but there's more to the story. For a lot of people, this trait seems to come with a package of odd details, little quirks that show up in the body, the mind, and sometimes even in how people feel day to day. It's easy to brush off these ideas as rumors. Some sound almost like science fiction. But there are real patterns, and scientists have actually studied some of them. So let's walk through what we know, what's just rumor, and where things get weird. First, let's look at hard data. In most countries, about 10 to 15% of people have Rh-negative blood. In some places, it's higher. For example, in parts of Spain and France, it can reach 25% or even 30%. That's not a small group. But even in these places, Rh-negative is the exception, not the rule. So, what physical traits have researchers linked to Rh-negative blood? One of the most common claims is about body temperature. Some people say Rh-negative people tend to have lower body temperatures. Not by a lot, but enough that they notice it. Instead of the usual 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit, some report being closer to 97 or even 96.5. Scientists haven't found a clear reason for this. And not every Rh-negative person has a lower temperature. But the stories come up often enough that it's become part of the myth. Another trait you'll hear about is blood pressure. Some people say Rh-negative folks have higher blood pressure, while others say it's lower. The truth is, studies haven't shown a strong or clear pattern either way. Blood pressure is affected by so many things: diet, activity, stress, genes, that it's hard to tie it to one blood type. So while people might notice a difference, there's no proof that Rh-negative blood means your blood pressure will be different from anyone else's. Here's something a little more solid. There's evidence that Rh-negative women are more likely to have what doctors call hemolytic disease of the newborn. This happens when an Rh-negative mother is pregnant with an Rh-positive baby. Her immune system can attack the baby's red blood cells. It's rare today because doctors watch for it. But in the past, before medicine caught up, it was a real danger. This is a unique problem for Rh-negative people, a physical risk that comes with the trait. Some people notice they react differently to certain medications. For example, there's some early evidence that Rh-negative people might respond to anesthesia in unexpected ways. This doesn't mean they can't have surgery, just that doctors sometimes have to watch a little closer. Again, the research isn't huge, but it's enough that some hospitals ask about Rh status before certain procedures. There are also claims about the immune system. Some say Rh-negative people get sick less often. Others claim they have more allergies or autoimmune problems. The science here is messy. There are a few small studies hinting that Rh-negative blood might change how the body reacts to certain diseases, but nothing huge or conclusive. It's the kind of thing that makes scientists curious, but it doesn't prove anything yet. Now let's talk about more unusual physical traits. There are stories, lots of stories about Rh-negative people having different eyes. Some say their eyes change color in the light. Others say they're more likely to have green or hazel eyes. The truth is, there's no gene that connects Rh-negative blood directly to eye color. But in places with more Rh-negative people, you do see more variety in eye color. That's probably not magic. It's just genetics mixing in different ways. Some say Rh-negative people are more likely to be left-handed. This one comes up in internet forums a lot. But when scientists look at big groups, they don't find a real link. Left-handedness is its own mystery. If you're Rh-negative and left-handed, you're just rare in two ways. There are even claims about body shape. Some think Rh-negative people are taller or have a certain bone structure. Again, when you look at real data, there's no clear pattern. People come in all shapes and sizes, no matter what their blood type is. But here's an odd one that actually has a little science behind it. Dreams and sleep. Some researchers have noticed that Rh-negative people report more vivid dreams. A few small studies in Europe found they're more likely to remember their dreams and sometimes report lucid dreaming. That's when you know you're dreaming and can control what happens. Nobody knows why this would connect to blood type. It could be pure coincidence. Or maybe it's a side effect of something else, like different brain chemistry. But it's a fun detail, and it's one of those things that makes you wonder. Let's slow down for a second and talk about pain. A handful of studies suggest Rh-negative people may experience pain differently. Some say they're more sensitive to certain kinds of pain, especially heat or pressure. Others claim the opposite, that they're more tolerant. The truth is, the research is mixed. Pain is a tough thing to measure. It's shaped by the mind, the body, even memory. So while there might be a tiny connection, it's not strong enough to use as a test. Here's a theory that floats around a lot. The idea that Rh-negative people heal faster from injuries. You'll see stories about cuts closing up quickly, bones mending fast, but so far there's no scientific proof. Healing depends on many things: age, nutrition, overall health. If there's a link to blood type, it's hiding deep in the data. Now, some people talk about the senses. There's a rumor that Rh-negative people have sharper senses, especially sight and smell. A few small surveys found that Rh-negative people rate their sense of smell as stronger than average. But when tested, the results are mixed. Some do better, some don't. Same with vision. There's no gene that ties Rh-negative blood to eagle eyes. But the rumor is sticky. Maybe because it fits the idea of being different in a hidden way. Let's move from senses to the mind. This is where things get really interesting. There are claims that Rh-negative people have a different way of thinking. Some say they're more intuitive or more creative. Others say they're more likely to question authority or to notice patterns other people miss. These aren't easy things to measure. There aren't big, controlled studies. Most of what we know comes from surveys, people answering questions about themselves. But there's one odd finding. In a few studies, Rh-negative people were slightly more likely to report feeling different from others. Not better or worse, just different. Some said they felt like outsiders in their families or schools. Again, it's hard to say what causes this. It could be the power of suggestion. If you grow up hearing you have a rare blood type, maybe you start to see yourself as rare in other ways too. There's also talk about sensitivity to heat and cold. Some say Rh-negative people feel cold more easily or get overheated faster. This could tie back to body temperature or just to how people notice their own bodies. The data here is thin, but it's another detail that pops up over and over. And then there's the myth that Rh-negative people are more likely to have extra ribs or vertebrae. This comes from a misunderstanding of a real medical fact. Sometimes, people are born with a small extra rib at the base of the neck, called a cervical rib. It's rare, and it happens in all blood types. There's no proof that Rh-negative people are more likely to have it. But it's the kind of detail that sticks in people's minds. Let's switch gears and talk about disease. One of the strangest facts about Rh-negative blood is how it relates to certain illnesses. For example, people with Rh-negative blood seem less likely to get some forms of toxoplasmosis, a disease caused by a tiny parasite. Toxoplasmosis can change behavior in animals and maybe even in humans. Some scientists think the Rh factor helps protect the brain from the effects of this parasite. If you're Rh-negative, you might have a different risk profile, not better or worse, just different. There's also some evidence that people with Rh-negative blood are slightly less likely to get severe malaria. Malaria is a disease carried by mosquitoes. It's a huge killer in parts of Africa and Asia. Certain blood types seem to give some protection, at least in small ways, but it's not a magic shield. Rh-negative people can still get sick, and the protection, if it exists, is only partial. Now, let's clear up a big myth. There's no evidence that Rh-negative people are more likely to have psychic powers, telepathy, or anything supernatural. These stories show up online, but there's no science behind them. Most researchers see these claims as part of the folklore that builds up around any rare trait. Still, it's worth asking, why do these stories exist? Why do people believe that Rh-negative people are special in all these ways? Part of it is the power of rarity. When something is uncommon, it feels mysterious. If you grow up knowing your blood is different from most people, it's natural to wonder if there's more to the story. Let's take a closer look at the numbers. In the Basque region of Spain and France, about 30% of people are Rh-negative. That's the highest rate in the world. The Basques are also known for having some unique physical traits: darker hair, a different language, and sometimes a different look. But that doesn't mean every Rh-negative person is Basque, or that every Basque trait comes from blood type. Genes mix in complicated ways. Blood type is just one part of the puzzle. Now compare that to places like China or Japan. In these countries, less than 1% of people are Rh negative, but you don't see a totally different set of physical traits. The main differences in looks come from other genes, not the Rh factor. So while the blood type is rare, it doesn't drive everything else about the body. Let's talk about how Rh negative blood is inherited. The gene for the Rh factor is passed down from your parents, just like eye color or hair color. If both your parents are Rh negative, you'll be Rh negative too. If only one is, you might be positive or negative, it depends on the mix. This means Rh negative blood often runs in families, and sometimes small towns or villages have higher rates just by chance. But here's the twist. Having Rh negative blood doesn't mean you're part of a separate group, or that you belong to a secret tribe. It just means you inherited a rare version of a gene. Over thousands of years, these genes have mixed and spread in ways that are hard to track. Some scientists have looked for links between Rh negative blood and other genetic markers, things like certain diseases or even mental health conditions. So far, they haven't found anything strong or clear. The Rh negative trait mostly seems to stand alone. It's a small quirk, not a sign of a bigger pattern. Let's stop for a moment and think about what this means. We're used to the idea that rare traits come with other rare features. Sometimes that's true, but with Rh negative blood, the evidence just isn't there. Most physical traits, height, weight, skin color, hair type, aren't tied to Rh status. The rare things people notice are often just coincidences, or the result of paying close attention to something unusual. But don't dismiss the power of a good story. The idea that Rh negative people are different has been around for a long time. It gives people a sense of identity, a way to stand out from the crowd. In some families, it's a point of pride. In others, it's just a strange fact you find out during a doctor's visit. There's one more angle to cover: how Rh negative blood affects pregnancy and family lines. In the past, before doctors understood the Rh factor, babies born to Rh negative mothers and Rh positive fathers were at risk. Sometimes they didn't survive. This could shape family trees in small ways, making Rh negative lines less common over time. But with modern medicine, this risk is mostly gone. Today, Rh negative people have children just like anyone else. Let's pull back and look at the big picture. When you add up all these details, what do you see? You see a rare trait scattered across the world, showing up in some places more than others. You see a handful of physical quirks that might be connected, but nothing dramatic. You see a lot of rumors, some with a hint of truth, some just wild stories passed around online. But the heart of the mystery isn't what's on the outside. It's what's hidden in the genes. Rh negative blood is an oddity because it's missing something, not because it adds something extra. The protein that marks positive blood is just gone, erased by a tiny change in the DNA. That's it. No secret powers, no hidden tribe, just a blank spot where a gene used to be. Still, that blank spot changed history. It forced doctors to learn more about blood and to invent new ways to save babies and mothers. It shaped family trees and gave rise to stories that stretch from the Basque country to the far side of the internet. So the next time someone says Rh negative people are different, you can say, yes, but not in the way you think. The real difference is small, invisible, tucked away in the code of life. It's a reminder that even the tiniest change in our bodies can echo across generations, shaping who we are and what stories we tell. And all of this, the facts, the rumors, the questions, leads to something bigger. It makes you wonder what blood type really says about a person. Is it just a detail, or is it a clue to something deeper? Before we get to that, let's pause and look at what the evidence really means for who we are and where we come from. So what does Rh negative blood really mean for identity? What does it actually say about who you are or where your ancestors came from? That's the question that keeps coming up. People want to know if this rare blood marker says something deep about them. Is it just a random trait? Or is it a clue to something bigger, a hidden thread that ties people together across history? Let's start with a simple idea. Blood types are just one way to sort people. There are many others: hair color, skin tone, eye shape, even the way our bodies process food. Most of these traits are easy to see or feel. Blood type isn't. You can't look at someone and know if they're Rh negative. You have to test for it. That makes it seem mysterious, almost secret. When people find out they're Rh negative, it often sparks questions. Sometimes it feels like joining a club you didn't know existed. You might wonder, why am I different from most people? Or does this mean I have special roots? It's a natural reaction. Humans are wired to look for patterns, to try and connect the dots. But here's the thing. Most of what makes us who we are is invisible. Blood type is just another tiny detail in a giant puzzle. It's not the main piece. Still, for some, it becomes a way to build identity. It's something rare, and rarity always catches our attention. Let's imagine you're growing up in a family where everyone is Rh positive, except you. Maybe you find out during a school blood drive, or maybe a doctor tells your mom when you're a baby. Suddenly, you're the odd one out. It's easy to start seeing yourself as different, not just in blood but in other ways too. Sometimes this feeling sticks around, shaping how you see yourself for years. Now picture a small village in the mountains of Spain, where Rh negative blood is common. There, being Rh negative isn't rare at all. It's normal. Nobody thinks twice about it. This shows how identity is shaped by context. What's strange in one place is everyday in another. But why does blood type get tied up with ideas about who we are? Part of it comes from history. For a long time, people didn't understand blood types. Blood was just blood. There was no testing, no way to know. Then, in the early 1900s, scientists started sorting blood into groups. Suddenly, there was a new way to draw lines between people. There were new categories: A, B, AB, O, positive, negative. As soon as these categories appeared, people started asking what they meant. They wondered if blood type could reveal secrets about ancestry, health, or even personality. Some of these ideas got twisted. In the early 20th century, there were even attempts to use blood type to support old, bad ideas about race. Those theories were wrong, and now they're rejected. But the urge to find meaning in blood never really went away. Rh negative blood took on a special role because it's less common. It's one of those things that raises questions, simply because it's rare. When something is rare, people want to explain it. They start building stories, sometimes based on science, sometimes on myth. One of the most common questions is about origin. Where did Rh negative blood come from? Some wonder if it points to an ancient group, maybe even a lost tribe. There are theories that try to link high rates of Rh negative blood to certain places, like the Basque region, as we saw earlier. But the truth is, genes move around. People have been traveling, marrying, and mixing for thousands of years. Blood types spread and shift. There's no single line that leads back to a secret group. Still, the idea of being from somewhere special has a strong pull. It's comforting to think you might have a hidden history or belong to a group with a unique past. This is how identity works. We're always looking for roots, for something that makes us feel like we belong. But what does the science say about identity and blood type? Here's what we know. Blood type is controlled by a small change in your DNA. For Rh negative, it means a certain protein is missing from your red blood cells. That's it. It's not a sign of being part of a different species or a lost civilization. It's just a tiny tweak in the code. Scientists have found that the gene for Rh negative blood is old. It's been around for tens of thousands of years. It's likely that early humans had both Rh positive and Rh negative genes in their populations. There's no pure group that only had Rh negative blood. Even in places where it's common today, like parts of Europe, it's not the only type. The idea of a pure bloodline is a myth. Over time, people moved, mixed, and shared their genes. That's how human history works. Sometimes people ask if blood type shapes personality. In some countries like Japan, there's a belief that your blood type can predict your character. People with different blood types are said to have different strengths, weaknesses, or temperaments. But the science doesn't back this up. Studies have looked for links between blood type and personality, and they mostly find nothing. Who you are has more to do with upbringing, culture, and life experience than with blood. But there's another layer to this. Even if blood type doesn't shape personality, the belief that it does can still shape how people see themselves. If you grow up hearing that your blood is rare or special, you might start acting like it's true. Maybe you see yourself as unique or as an outsider. Maybe you become more curious or more protective of your family story. Here's an example. In online forums, you'll find people sharing stories about being Rh negative. Some say they always felt different, more creative, more sensitive, more likely to question things. Others say they felt left out or misunderstood. These stories aren't proof of anything genetic, but they do show how powerful identity can be. Sometimes it starts with something as simple as a line on a medical chart. Let's talk about belonging. Humans crave connection. We want to feel part of a group, even if it's a small or secret one. For some, finding out they're Rh negative is a way to join a club. It becomes a kind of badge. You hear about Rh negative support groups, and even Rh negative dating sites. These communities give people a sense of belonging and a place to share stories or swap tips about health. But there's a flip side to this. Sometimes focusing on differences can make people feel more alone. If you hear over and over that you're rare or strange, it can be isolating. You might start to wonder if you really fit in with the world around you. This is especially true for kids and teenagers who are already trying to figure out who they are. Here's where things get interesting. In some families, being Rh negative is a source of pride. Maybe it's a trait that gets passed down, like red hair or blue eyes. Parents tell their kids, "You're special, just like your grandmother." It becomes a family story, a way to connect across generations. In other families, it's just a medical details, something you write down on a form and forget. Now think about how identity shifts with new information. Before blood tests, people had no idea about blood types. They built their sense of self around other things: language, religion, place. When blood types were discovered, it added a new layer. Suddenly, there was one more way to be different, or to find a connection. Today, genetic testing is changing the story again. You can order a test online and learn about hundreds of details in your DNA. Blood type is just one of many. Some people find out they have roots in places they never expected. Others discover rare traits they share with distant cousins. For some, it's exciting. For others, it's confusing. But here's what doesn't change. Identity is always a mix. It's shaped by your family, your culture, your choices, and yes, your genes. But no single trait tells the whole story. Rh negative blood is just one thread in a giant web. Let's look at it another way. Imagine you're sitting with friends around a table. You all have different stories, different backgrounds. Maybe one person is Rh negative, another is not. Does it matter? In day-to-day life, it hardly ever comes up. Most of what brings people together, shared laughter, old memories, favorite foods, has nothing to do with blood. But for some, knowing their blood type adds something. It's a reminder that the body holds secrets, that we're all a little bit mysterious. It can spark curiosity. It can make you wonder who your ancestors were and what journeys they took. Some people take this curiosity and run with it. They dive into research, looking for patterns in their family tree. Maybe they find an ancestor from the Basque country or from Ireland, places with higher rates of Rh negative blood. Maybe they discover nothing at all. Either way, the search itself becomes part of their story. Others use their rare blood type as a way to help. Rh negative blood is needed in hospitals. Donating can save lives, especially for babies and mothers. For these people, it's not just a curiosity, it's a gift they can share. Still, there's a risk in putting too much weight on blood type. If you start to see yourself as special or set apart because of a tiny detail in your DNA, you might miss the bigger picture. We're all more alike than we are different. The things that matter most, kindness, courage, love, don't show up in a blood test. But it's human nature to look for meaning, even in small things. That's why stories about Rh negative blood keep going. They fill a need. They give us something to talk about, something to wonder over late at night. Let's pause for a second and think about the urge to find meaning in biology. We do this with lots of traits, not just blood type, but also left-handedness, eye color, even birthmarks. We want to believe there's a reason for everything, a pattern behind the chaos. Sometimes there is. Sometimes it's just random. With Rh negative blood, the science says it's a rare trait, passed down by chance. It's not a sign of being chosen or set apart, but the stories we tell about it can shape how we see ourselves and each other. That's the real power of identity, not in the genes, but in the meaning we make out of them. Now let's look at another angle, the idea of blood type as a marker for group identity. In some countries, blood type is used as a way to sort people. In Japan, for example, it's common to ask about blood type on dating profiles or job applications. People see it as one more clue about personality. But in most of the world, blood type isn't part of daily identity. It comes up in hospitals or when you donate blood, but that's about it. For Rh-negative people, this can feel a bit lonely. There's no big club, no flag, no national holiday. The sense of identity is quieter, more private. It's something you carry inside, a strange fact, a family story. And yet that small detail can be powerful. It can spark conversations. It can make you feel connected to distant places or to strangers who share your type. It can be a reason to reach out or to learn more about where you come from. In the end, what does Rh-negative blood really mean for identity? It's a reminder that we're all built from millions of tiny choices, made by our ancestors across thousands of years. Some of those choices left marks we can see like a language or a family name. Others are hidden, tucked away in our cells. Rh-negative blood is one of those hidden marks. It doesn't make you better or worse, just different in a quiet way. For some, it's a source of pride. For others, it's just another medical detail. What matters most is the story you choose to tell about it. Maybe you see it as a mystery, a puzzle piece that never quite fits. Maybe you see it as a badge, a sign of rare heritage, or maybe you don't think about it at all. That's fine too. What's clear is that identity is always changing. It's shaped by new discoveries, by family stories, by the questions we ask. Blood type is just one small part. The real story is bigger, woven from history, culture, and the choices we make every day. As we keep digging into the mystery of Rh-negative blood, it's good to remember this. The answers we find might not change who we are, but the search itself is part of what makes us human. We wonder. We ask questions. We look for meaning, even in the tiniest places. And sometimes, that's enough. So after all this talk about identity and meaning, you might be wondering, what do we actually know for sure? What's fact, what's rumor, and what's still a mystery? Let's take a careful look at the evidence and see where it leads. Alright, let's dig into the facts. What do we actually know about Rh-negative blood? Where it appears, how it works, and what scientists have figured out so far? Not the myths, not the wild theories, just the real concrete stuff. This is where the details matter. First, let's talk about the basics. Rh-negative blood is defined by the absence of a certain protein on the surface of red blood cells. That protein is called the D antigen. If you have it, you're Rh positive. If you don't, you're Rh negative. It's that simple. This protein is part of the larger Rh group, but the D antigen is the main one doctors care about. How common is Rh-negative blood? It depends on where you look. In the United States, about 15% of people are Rh-negative. In most of Europe, especially Western and Northern regions, it's a bit higher, closer to 16% or 17%. In Spain, especially among the Basque people, it can go up to 30% or even a little higher. But if you go to Asia or Africa, the numbers drop fast. In China, India, and most of East Asia, less than 1% of people are Rh-negative. Same story in most of Africa. So it's not spread evenly around the world. That's one of the things that makes it interesting. Why these differences? It's all about genetics. Rh-negative blood is caused by a change or mutation in the gene that makes the D antigen. If you get 2 copies of the altered gene, one from each parent, you'll be Rh-negative. If you get one or none, you'll be Rh positive. It's a classic recessive trait, kind of like blue eyes or red hair. Here's something scientists agree on. The mutation that causes Rh-negative blood is old. It didn't pop up last week, or even in the last 1,000 years. Genetic studies show it's been around for at least 20,000 to 30,000 years. Some researchers think it could be even older, maybe as far back as 50,000 years. That puts it deep in the Stone Age, long before writing, farming, or cities. The earliest proof comes from ancient DNA. In the last 20 years, scientists have started pulling DNA from old bones, teeth, and even mummies. When they test these samples, they sometimes find the Rh-negative gene. It shows up in ancient European hunter-gatherers and sometimes in Neanderthals and Denisovans, our distant cousins. But it's rare, just like today. One thing to remember, we don't have a perfect record. DNA breaks down over time, especially in hot or wet places. That means most of what we know about ancient blood types comes from Europe and Central Asia, where the climate is better for preserving remains. In Africa, Asia, and the Americas, the evidence is thinner. So, gaps in the map don't mean the gene wasn't there, they just mean we haven't found it yet. Now, let's zoom in on how the Rh-negative gene spread. This is where things get tricky. The gene might have started in a small group, somewhere in Western Eurasia. Over thousands of years, people moved, married, and passed the gene along. Sometimes it spread, sometimes it faded out. In places where people stayed put or had fewer outsiders moving in, the gene stuck around at higher rates. That's why you see pockets like the Basque region or parts of Ireland with lots of Rh-negative people. But the gene didn't stay in one place. It moved with people: traders, farmers, wanderers. In ancient times, trade routes crossed Europe, Asia, and North Africa. People and their genes traveled along with spices, metal, and stories. When scientists study the DNA of people from different times and places, they see the Rh-negative gene popping up here and there, never in huge numbers, but always present. Let's talk numbers for a second. Worldwide, about 7% of people are Rh-negative. That might not sound like much, but it adds up. There are over 500 million Rh-negative people alive right now. In the US alone, that's about 50 million. That's more people than live in Canada. So while it's rare, it's not vanishingly rare. Now here's a strange twist. Rh-negative blood can cause problems during pregnancy. If an Rh-negative mom carries an Rh-positive baby, her body might react to the baby's blood as if it's an invader. This can lead to something called hemolytic disease of the newborn. Before doctors figured this out, it was a serious risk. Babies could get very sick or even die. Today, doctors have a simple shot that prevents this problem. But for most of history, this was a real danger. So why does this matter? From an evolutionary point of view, traits that cause trouble for survival usually fade away. If Rh-negative blood made pregnancies more dangerous, you'd expect it to disappear over time. But it didn't. It's still around, and in some places it's even common. That's one of the puzzles scientists are still trying to solve. There are a few ideas. Maybe the risk only shows up when Rh-negative women have babies with Rh-positive men. In small isolated groups where most people have the same blood type, the risk is low. Or maybe there's some hidden benefit to being Rh-negative that we haven't found yet. In science, things are rarely simple. Let's look at health for a moment. Does being Rh-negative make you healthier or sicker? The evidence is mixed. Some studies show that Rh-negative people might be a bit more likely to have certain allergies or immune system problems. Others show no real difference. In most cases, being Rh-negative doesn't seem to affect your day-to-day health. The only big risk is in pregnancy. And that's now easy for doctors to manage. Here's where things get even more tangled. Some researchers have looked for links between Rh-negative blood and resistance to certain diseases. For example, there's a parasite called Toxoplasma gondii. It's famous for infecting cats, and sometimes people. Some small studies suggest that Rh-negative people might react differently to this parasite. Maybe they're more sensitive, or maybe less. The results aren't clear. No one's found a big, life-changing difference. People have also looked for links to mental health, or even how people react to stress. Again, nothing solid. It's easy to find small studies that say maybe, but nothing that stands up when tested on large groups. Most scientists think Rh-negative blood is just a quiet trait, not a superpower or a curse. But let's not skip over the weird stuff. There's a reason Rh-negative blood has sparked so many odd stories. For years, it's been the subject of rumors, claims about special abilities, or even alien ancestry. None of these stories are backed by facts. Scientists have never found any real link between Rh-negative blood and anything supernatural or strange. It's just a rare genetic trait, like left-handedness or being able to roll your tongue. Still, the mystery sticks around. Part of it is the numbers. Why is Rh-negative blood so common in some places and so rare in others? Why hasn't it disappeared, even though it can make pregnancy harder? And why did this tiny difference in blood lead to so many questions? Let's try to answer some of these using what science actually knows. First, the spread of Rh-negative blood follows the movement of people, not magic. Archaeologists and geneticists have mapped out family trees using DNA. They see that the Rh-negative gene likely appeared in Western Eurasia, then spread out from there. Every time a group of people moved across Europe, into North Africa, up into the British Isles, the gene went with them. When groups mixed, the gene mixed too. When they stayed apart, the gene stayed strong in some places and faded in others. Second, the gene is old. Much older than written history. It's not a sign of a lost civilization or a hidden race. It's not proof of anything beyond the slow, messy mixing of human families over thousands of years. If you're Rh negative, your ancestors probably came from a place where the gene was common. That's it. Third, the problems with pregnancy are real, but they're manageable. Before the 1960s, Rh disease was a big deal. Thousands of babies died every year in Europe and North America. Then, doctors figured out how to prevent it. Today, with a simple shot, the risk is almost gone. This is one of those places where science made a huge difference in people's lives. Fourth, there's no real evidence that Rh negative people are different in any other way. No link to personality, no link to intelligence, no secret talents. The only thing that sets Rh negative people apart is the lack of one tiny protein on their blood cells. That's it. Fifth, the gene doesn't care about borders or cultures. It shows up in people from all backgrounds, all walks of life. You can find Rh negative blood in teachers, athletes, farmers, doctors, artists, anywhere. It doesn't tell you anything about who a person is, what they believe, or what they can do. Now, what about modern tools? In the last decade, DNA testing has exploded. Millions of people have sent their spit to companies that map out ancestry and traits. These tests can spot the Rh negative gene in your DNA. But here's the thing, they almost never highlight it as a big deal. For most people, it's just another line in a long list of traits. That's how science sees it too. Let's talk about blood banks for a second. Rh negative blood is valuable. If you have it, especially O negative, you can help save anyone's life. Hospitals keep careful track of Rh negative donors because their blood can be used in emergencies when there's no time to test the patient's type. That's why you sometimes hear about calls for O negative donors after big accidents or disasters. Still, the numbers are steady. Rh negative rates haven't changed much in the last 100 years. In some places, they've slowly dropped as people move and mix. But overall, the trait is sticking around, generation after generation. Scientists are still looking for answers. They want to know if there's a hidden reason the gene survived. Maybe there was an ancient disease that killed only Rh positive people, and being Rh negative helped some survive. Maybe the gene just got lucky, spreading in a small group and sticking around by chance. These are open questions, and the search continues. Another thing worth noting, Rh negative blood isn't the only rare trait out there. There are dozens of blood group systems, each with their own quirks. Some people have even rarer blood types like Bombay blood or golden blood, Rh null, which are found in only a handful of people worldwide. Compared to these, Rh negative is almost common. So what's the bottom line? Here's what the evidence shows. Rh negative blood is an old, rare trait caused by a simple genetic change. It's more common in some places than others, but it's found all over the world. It can cause problems during pregnancy, but those problems are now easy to fix. There's no proof it makes people special or different in any deep way. The stories and myths are just that, stories. Still, the mystery isn't completely solved. Science keeps digging for answers. Every year, new studies come out looking for clues in DNA, in ancient bones, in hospital records. The more we learn, the more we realize how much is left to discover. When you look at the facts, Rh negative blood is a reminder of how strange and complicated humans really are. We carry old secrets in our genes, some useful, some just along for the ride. We invent stories to explain what we don't understand, and sometimes those stories take on a life of their own. But at the end of the day, the real evidence is simple. Rh negative blood is just one more twist in the human story. It doesn't make anyone special or strange. It's not a sign of hidden origins. It's just another part of the puzzle, waiting for science to fit it into the bigger picture. And that brings us to the end of our journey through the facts. The next step is to step back, see what all this means, and maybe even find a little peace in the mystery. So, we've gone through the facts. We know where Rh negative blood appears, how it works, and how it's been passed down. But if you step back and look at the bigger picture, some questions still linger. Why does this rare trait exist at all? Why didn't it vanish, like so many other genetic quirks that made life harder? What does it really say about us, about humans, and the way we've moved and mixed over time? It's easy to forget how many mysteries are hidden in everyday things. Most of us don't think about blood types. Unless you need a transfusion, or a doctor brings it up, it's just one of those details you rarely notice. But dig a little, and even something as basic as a blood type can open up 1,000 questions. It's a reminder, there's always more going on beneath the surface. Think about the way blood types are passed down. Every person is a blend of their parents, their grandparents, and so on, stretching back for thousands of years. Each trait you carry is like a message, passed through a line of ancestors you'll never meet. Some of those messages are clear. Brown eyes, curly hair, freckles. Others are quieter and harder to spot, like Rh-negative blood. But they all tell a story of families, of travel, of survival. Now with the Rh-negative trait, the story gets even stranger. It's never been the most common trait. In most places it's always been rare. And yet, it's still here. That means, for thousands of years, this little twist in our DNA has managed to hang on. It survived wars, migrations, disasters, and all the random luck that shapes who gets born and who doesn't. Here's what makes that odd. Usually, if a trait causes problems, especially problems with having healthy children, it fades out. Nature doesn't keep things that make life harder. And yet, Rh-negative blood stuck around. Not just in one place, but in many. Some parts of the world have whole communities with high rates, others almost none. But the trait refuses to disappear. That stubbornness is interesting. It hints there might be more to the story. Maybe in some hidden way, Rh-negative blood helped people in the past. Maybe it protected against some ancient illness, or maybe it just survived by chance. Sometimes genetics is a roll of the dice. A small group gets isolated, a rare trait becomes common, and then, years later, it spreads again when people move and mix. The truth is, we don't have all the answers. And that's not a bad thing. Science is about questions as much as answers. Every time we solve one mystery, another pops up. That's what keeps scientists going. They know the world is complicated, and they're okay with that. Now, it's easy to get caught up in the strange side of Rh-negative blood, the myths, the rumors, the wild ideas. But when you look at the facts, you see something else. You see the real story is about people. People moving, adapting, and passing on tiny pieces of themselves. It's about how small changes can last for thousands of years, even when nobody notices. That's kind of beautiful, isn't it? Another thing to think about. Rh-negative blood isn't alone. There are dozens of rare traits in people all over the world. Some are visible, like red hair or blue eyes. Others, like certain blood types or immunity to diseases, stay hidden unless you look closely. Each one is a clue, a tiny piece of the bigger puzzle of where we came from and how we got here. Sometimes the most interesting puzzles are the ones we haven't finished yet. Rh-negative blood is one of those. Scientists are still looking for the full story. Maybe they'll find a link to some forgotten disease. Maybe they'll uncover a benefit we never saw. Or maybe it's just a leftover from our deep tangled past, a genetic echo, hanging on for no special reason at all. Either way, there's something comforting about that. It means the story of humans isn't finished. We're still learning, still growing, still carrying old mysteries inside us. Some of those mysteries are in our genes. Others are in the way we tell stories, the way we wonder about the world. If you look at history, you see this pattern everywhere. Simple things turn out to be complex. Little differences matter in surprising ways. And the biggest lessons often come from things we ignored at first. Blood types, eye color, even the shape of our teeth. Each one tells a story if you know how to listen. Here's what's wild. None of us chose our traits. We don't pick our blood type. We don't decide what color our eyes will be, or whether we'll have a certain gene. We just get what our parents pass down. And yet, these traits can shape our lives in ways we never expect. They decide who can give us blood in an emergency, who shares our health risks, sometimes even how we move through the world. But at the same time, these traits don't define us. Rh-negative blood is just one tiny part of who someone is. It doesn't say anything about your mind, your spirit, your dreams, or your worth. It's a detail, cool, rare, a little mysterious, but not a secret code or a sign of anything deeper. That's easy to forget when you hear wild stories. People want reasons for everything. We want to believe there's meaning in every difference. Sometimes that's true. Other times, things just happen. The gene changes. It spreads. It sticks around because nobody dies from it, or maybe because the world just got lucky that way. Still, even if the facts aren't as wild as the stories, there's something magical about knowing you carry an ancient trait. If you're Rh negative, you're part of a chain that goes back before history, before writing, before people even built villages. You've got a piece of the past in your blood. That's a quiet kind of wonder. And if you're not Rh negative, well, you're still part of the same story. Your blood, your genes, they've traveled just as far. They've weathered just as many storms. Every person alive today is the result of millions of years of survival, luck, and change. We're all, in some way, rare. There's a lesson here. The world is full of old secrets. Most of them are hidden in plain sight. Traits like Rh negative blood are reminders that history isn't just in books or museums. It's in us. It's in the way we're built, the things we carry, the questions we ask, and questions matter. The search for answers is what keeps us pushing forward. Even if the answers are simple, it's just a gene, nothing more. The asking is important. It means we're curious. It means we care about where we came from. That's always been part of being human. If you're ever feeling small or ordinary, remember this. Your body is full of stories you'll never know. Your blood, your bones, your eyes, they're all shaped by people who lived, loved, and survived far before you were born. Every one of us is a collection of mysteries. Rh negative blood is just one. There are hundreds more waiting to be found. Some will make sense. Others will leave us guessing. That's okay. Life is a puzzle. Sometimes the pieces fit neatly. Sometimes they don't. But the search is what makes it interesting. So next time you hear about blood types or strange traits or odd facts about humans, maybe pause for a second. Think about all the miles your genes have traveled. Think about the stories locked inside you, waiting to be discovered. The world is bigger and stranger than it looks, and you're a part of that. And that's the real magic at the end of the day. Not secret powers, not lost civilizations, not hidden messages in our DNA. Just the quiet truth that every person is a survivor. Every person carries history inside them. We're all mysteries, even to ourselves. If you look at the world that way, it gets a little softer, a little more interesting, and maybe, just maybe, a little easier to fall asleep, knowing you're part of something ancient and unfinished. The story keeps going, the mystery stays open. And that's enough for tonight.